Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Montgomery County Delegation night one of our bill hearings. We have a packed agenda of bills tonight, but to start, let me thank Rebecca and Selena, who will be sort of staffing our hearing and handling our Zoom in and out flow. Let me also welcome and congratulate Delegate to be, Delegate designate, Delegate-elect Linda Foley. Who any day now will be made official. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And given where you are in the process, we're having you participate fully tonight, and you'll be assigned to Vice Chair Carr's Metro Washington committee. So congratulations and welcome aboard.
Thank you.
I would like to remind folks that the process here is this is just the first step in each of these bills' legislative lives. After this, they will be assigned to one of our local committees, where they'll be subject to work sessions. They will be subject to a vote of the full delegation. If they proceed through that process, they'll go through the regular House process. And then eventually, if they succeed there, go on to the Senate. So this is just the first step in the long legislative life of a bill. So there's plenty of time to get your input in and your thoughts and feedback. As a reminder, the bill hearings will be chaired by the local committee chairs. Elected officials have 5 minutes to speak. Representatives organizations have 3 minutes to speak, and individuals have 2 minutes to speak. And of course, members will be able to ask questions. Before I turn it over to our local, and there's obviously a big timer on the screen. As you can see, it's a 3 right now, to remind folks to follow the time. And I should say, although elected officials have 5 minutes to speak, the bill, the bill sponsor, the delegate or senator, has unlimited time. Rules of the House. Before I turn it over to our local committee chairs, Chair Kramer, anything to add from the Senate perspective?
Thank you for that, Chair Corman. But I think you've covered the bases. I would just like to wish all of our colleagues here in the legislature and all of those that will be visiting with us, watching the hearing tonight, my very best for a delightful holiday season. And just ask that everyone who's testifying be mindful of the clock that Chair Corman just mentioned, and look forward to the discussion this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Kramer. And as I turn it over to the chair of our Education, Elections, and Housing Committee, let me also thank Chair Shetty. She helped us navigate a bill through the process last week for our school board redistricting.
Where do you guys want to go? Do you want to just find some passages to go through?
And Delegate Fraser, oh, there you go. So thank you, Chair Shetty, for your work last week. And let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Corman, Chair Kramer. Lovely to see everybody this evening. We will begin with MC 122, Montgomery County Business Regulation Landlord License, brought to us by my district mate, Delegate Al Carr. So I will recognize our bill sponsor first, Delegate Carr.
Good evening, Madam Chair and colleagues. For the record, Al Carr here to present MC 122. The purpose of the bill is to help our constituents who are renters gain access to multiple wired cable and broadband providers. When providers compete, consumers win. People like me who live in single-family homes or in townhomes are fortunate to have access to 2 or even 3 choices for wired cable and broadband providers. This healthy competition incentivizes good service and low prices. If I feel like I'm not getting a good deal from my current provider, I can threaten to disconnect and switch. But renters are often limited to a single provider because their landlord has cut a deal with the cable company. Under this arrangement, landlords get paid in exchange for working with the cable company to create an artificial monopoly arrangement. Attached to my written testimony is a list of 48 large Montgomery County apartment buildings across multiple legislative districts in which thousands of tenants are limited to a single provider. The list continues to grow as we survey additional buildings, but we're confident to say that tens of thousands of Montgomery County apartment dwellers are limited to a single provider. MC 1-22 addresses this problem by requiring owners of apartment buildings with 5 or more units to obtain and annually renew a license. A license would be contingent upon giving tenants access to all franchise providers. It's modeled after legislation that's been on the books in Anne Arundel County for over 15 years. The advantage of enacting this policy in state law instead of in county law is that state law covers the entire county, including municipalities like Rockville, Gaithersburg, and Tacoma Park. President Joe Biden agrees that this is a problem that needs to be addressed. He highlighted the issue of broadband equity in his July executive order on competition. But we need not wait for the federal government to act. By passing MC 1-22, we can follow in the footsteps of Anne Arundel County, Washington, D.C., and other jurisdictions to bring broadband equity to our renter constituents sooner than later. I ask for your favorable report. One of my witnesses is John Lyons. He's here in his personal capacity, and he's the former cable administrator for Anne Arundel County and can answer any questions about how things worked there. That's the jurisdiction that we're using as a model for this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Carr. Recognizing Delegate Lukey for question.
Thanks, Madam Chair. My question, Delegate, and I don't disagree with the premise that people should have consumer choice in terms of broadband, but is it necessary to create a new license to do that? I ask because my understanding is there's an existing license, a rental license that these same landlords would have to get. So now we're applying two different licenses for the same economic activity, and it seems, I don't know, duplicative.
Sure, Delegate, that's a great question. So there's different ways to accomplish the goal. This bill is patterned after the approach in Anne Arundel County, where there's a license. In DC government, Washington, D.C. takes a slightly different approach that doesn't involve a license. And we could certainly amend the bill to follow that path instead. Yeah, it does require a license, but it's not a burdensome license because it's not expensive, and it uses the well-oiled machine of the clerk of the circuit courts. You and I both know that they issue all of our state business licenses. It's a very easy process, not burdensome at all.
Thank you. Recognizing Chair Barve for question.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I think you answered one of the questions I had. Let me just go through these things quickly. I notice on page 4, lines 14 and 15, tenant is defined as meaning a lessee, a person occupying the property, whether or not a party to the lease. What do you mean? Give me a specific example of what kind of person you intend to include with this language.
Yes, Chairman Barve. So yeah, I instructed the bill drafter to mimic the language that is in the Anne Arundel County Code on this topic. So that's the language the drafter came up with. I'm not wedded to it. I'm open to tweaking it to something else that better captures the idea of simply giving renters a choice of broadband provider.
Okay, so to be clear, this is a statewide license that will only apply in Montgomery County. Is that what your intention is?
Correct. It's a state license that will apply only in Montgomery County. Just like there's about 20 other types of business licenses in this section of the law, the business regulation article, and some of them apply only in one county, or some of them apply only not in one county. For example, there's something called a restaurant license that applies in every county except Montgomery County.
Okay, so the reason I asked, and this is the way they do it in Anne Arundel County?
Correct. In Anne Arundel County, they have a local law in their county code that does exactly what this bill does.
Okay, so I guess the reason I asked that question is, and I'm not an expert on cable TV laws by any means. That's typically handled by the Economic Matters Committee and Finance and the Senate side. But my understanding was that the regulation of cable TV providers is something that's given exclusively to local governments, not to state governments. And so I'm a little concerned that using a state license might mess with your intention. I don't know. Has anybody brought this up to you, or?
Yeah, my understanding is that cable television can be regulated at either the state or the local level. There are a number of states that have statewide cable laws. Virginia is one, New York is another, New Jersey is another. So my understanding is that we have free reign as a state legislature to be able to legislate on the topic of cable franchises.
Okay, and my final question is this. Currently, could the Montgomery County government do this without a statewide law?
Yes, Montgomery County could pass a local law to do this, like Anne Arundel County's law. A Montgomery County law would only cover the unincorporated parts of the county, so it wouldn't include Gaithersburg, it wouldn't include Rockville, it wouldn't include Tacoma Park. By doing it the way this bill is written, it will cover the entire county, including all the municipalities.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chair Barve. Recognizing Delegate Wilkins for questions.
Thank you so much, Chair Shetty. Good evening, colleagues. Thank you so much, Delegate Carr, for introducing this bill to help around the issue of renters' rights. I just wanted to get back to the intent of the bill and also ask a question. So one, if you can just restate very clearly and succinctly how this bill is going to help and support renters when it comes to their rights. And I also wanted to know about revenue generation. Is this a revenue generating fines, fees kind of bill? Can you talk more about any costs that would be associated as well?
Yes, thank you, Delegate Wilkins. So yeah, the bill is designed to mimic the existing law in Anne Arundel County by requiring each landlord 5 or more units to obtain this license. And a condition of obtaining, renewing the license is that your tenants have to have access to all of the franchise providers. So that's how it works. And in terms of revenue, I think one of the opponents said, well, why doesn't it say in the bill, where the revenue goes or what, how the revenue is divided? And that's because when our bill drafters write bills, they only include the sections of law that are changing. So this issue of where does the revenue go is a section of law that it's not changing. It's in the business regulation article already for the 20 odd licenses that already exist. And the answer is that 90% of the revenue goes to the local jurisdiction where the license is being issued, and 10% goes to the state government. And this is a policy bill. It's not meant to raise revenue. So it's like $2 per unit, maxing out at $100 for a license. So if you had a large apartment building with 200 units, that equals like 50 cents per unit per year. So it is a very tiny amount of money that is not going to raise the cost of housing or create a financial burden on renters.
Thank you. Delegate Kaiser for question.
Thank you so much, Chair Shetty, and thank you, Delegate Carr, for putting this bill in. And I, at this moment, thinking very favorably of it. I want to understand from your perspective, one of the opponents' testimony said that it's this exclusive access is already prohibited by the FCC. If that exclusive access is actually prohibited by the FCC, why can't renters have their choice for cable?
Yeah, so in my written testimony, I linked to this Wired magazine article. They talk about the issue, and basically providers and landlords have found creative ways around the FCC's ruling in 2007. So it's interesting because the opponent is saying on one hand, oh, the bill's not needed because the FCC already banned exclusive access agreements in 2007. But then, further down on the same page, they say that, oh, well, the FCC has reopened this issue and they're looking into it. So we shouldn't act locally because they're looking to solve it on the national level. So it's, a little contradictory there. But yeah, if you can look at the attachment to my testimony, you can see a lot of buildings in, your district and my district that where our constituents don't have a choice of provider.
Okay, well, if our constituents don't have a choice, then clearly this FCC thing is irrelevant, extraneous, or disingenuous a reference. So, okay, I appreciate it, Delegate Carr. Thank you.
Thank you. Recognizing Delegate Chi.
Delegate Carr, I wonder how it plays out in real life. Let's say I'm a renter and I'm interested in an alternative provider instead of the one offered to me by my landlord, right? So then what? The landlord will go ahead and negotiate a different contract with a provider? Or can I, as a renter, directly go with a different provider? I mean, how does that work?
Sure. So under the current arrangement, we have a lot of these buildings in Montgomery County where there's only a single provider. So a renter doesn't have the ability to disconnect service and switch to another provider. But under this bill, we're establishing the policy that that renters can have their provider of choice, that a landlord shouldn't artificially stop a provider from coming into a building to serve the tenants. So, the hope is that, more of these buildings will have multiple providers and the tenants will have a choice. Of course, there are a lot of, challenges when you're wiring up a building with cable or with broadband service. And, I don't know that this bill will solve every problem, but the hope that it will at least solve some of the, artificially created limitations on a second provider or a third provider.
Thank you, but I'm just trying to picture how it plays out in real life. As an individual renter or household, do I go ahead and negotiate my own sign up with my own provider of choice, or would the landlord have to act on my behalf and then get into some kind of a contract? So the landlord could get into a dozen contracts for a dozen potential renters if they all want different providers, hypothetically, right?
Well, I think ideally you want to have the renters to have a choice. I'm a renter. I can call Comcast and order Xfinity. I can call Verizon and order Fios, or depending on where I live in the county, maybe I can call up and order RCN service. That's ideal. And in that case, of course, the providers have to work with the landlord to gain physical access to the building, but it's not like every renter has a contract with the landlord. They're dealing directly as consumers with the three providers.
Thank you. Delegate-elect Foley. You must come off mute.
Thank you. Thank you. Does this bill intend to cover, for example, satellite services as well as hardwired services? And what if any, implications have you looked at? What, if any, implications there are for large apartment facilities with that situation? Because you'd have to have a dish, right? So.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Delegate-elect, delegate nominee. I'm not sure the right term. That's a great question. So the bill is really aimed at our franchise providers, which in Montgomery County, there are three: Verizon, Comcast, and RCN. So it's silent on the issue of a satellite provider. You do have some buildings that might have a satellite provider only that they've cut a deal with, and the tenants don't have access to any of the three wired cable providers, but this bill would open that building up to the three wired providers, in addition to if there was a satellite arrangement. And a lot of some tenants can get just a satellite on their patio or something, and they don't even have to go through the building anyway.
Thank you. Are there any further questions for the bill sponsor? Great. Seeing none, we will move to our organizations who are testifying in support. We've got Chris Perry first from the Montgomery County Renters Alliance. 3 minutes, please.
Good evening, Montgomery County Senators and delegates. My name is Chris Perry, and I serve as the Vice Chair of the Renters Alliance Board of Directors. Can you hear me okay? The first and only regional nonprofit dedicated exclusively to renter outreach, education, organization, and advocacy. Tonight, the Renters Alliance speaks in support of MC 1-22, which would allow and promote competition in the cable television market and accompanying broadband internet service for renters in multifamily apartment communities in Montgomery County. First, let me give you some facts. According to a recent Wikipedia article, the United States lags the People's Republic of China in total number of fixed broadband internet subscriptions. We're number 2. And in terms of the number of subscriptions per 100 citizens, we're number 24, behind Gibraltar, Switzerland, France, South Korea, and Iceland. According to a 2018 report to Montgomery County government, and I quote, because of the importance of broadband internet access, it is becoming commonplace for businesses to purchase internet service from at least 2 broadband service providers, unquote. MC 1-22 states that what is good for Montgomery County businesses is also good for renters in apartments as well. Now, my own story. During the 12 years I've lived in a 250-unit apartment building in downtown Silver Spring, I've been restricted to service from only one internet service provider, and that is Comcast, also known as Xfinity. I've inquired about Verizon fiber optic service called Fios, but never been able to get the service in my building. During that same time, I have tried unsuccessfully to interest my apartment management in 2 different service providers who used innovative high-speed radio-based technology that competed directly with Comcast. You can understand that I'm very interested in Delegate Carr's proposal to increase competition among broadband service providers. Like hundreds of other retirees, my wife and I live on a fixed income. If I buy gasoline, groceries, or any other commodity, I have dozens of places offering the same product or equivalent at competitive prices. All I have to do is shop around. But because apartment management companies get a cut from service providers for exclusive access to renters, we have to pay whatever Comcast feels like charging. In a way, it's an additional fee to many other fees we have to pay to live where we live now. And by the way, I have no alternative to sudden failures in Comcast service, which happen without warning and often last for hours at a time. Verizon fiber optics might be a reliable and more reliable service and could be offered at or below the rate Comcast charges. As a renter and a voter, I'm asking you to please support Delegate Carr's measure, MC 1-22. I believe it will make Comcast, Verizon, RCN, and other service providers more competitive, and it will include my community with others in Montgomery County and the district that already offer both Comcast and Verizon Fios to their tenants. It is time to break the monopoly and open internet access to more families throughout Montgomery County. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Recognizing Arwin Bain Cosby on behalf of RCN Corporation testifying in support. 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Okay. Established in 1993, RCN maintains and operates its own fiber-rich network, offering competitively priced high-speed internet, streaming TV, and phone. We have been a part of the Montgomery County community for years, providing an award-winning internet service and 24/7 customer support. RCN is committed to 3 fundamental tenets: partnership, choice, and technology, whereby we partner with residential and commercial property owners and developers in order to provide a choice of service for commercial and residential use. We welcome the opportunity to serve Montgomery County citizens who currently are not able to access our services due to current restrictions and limitations. RCN supports MC 1-22 for the following reasons. First, creating an environment of choice will foster a competitive market for quality products, pricing, and overall service. Second, MC 1-22 provides an incentive for multifamily landlords to remain engaged, invested, and active in the action required to address the barriers to equitable access and choice. Finally, the Federal Trade Commission ruling does not go far enough to address the gap between inaction and purposefully entering exclusive agreements. Multifamily residents may have access to some level of broadband, but choices of service providers along with products and pricing options that meet their needs are likely limited. A competitive market with representation of a full suite of providers is what allows equitable access for every multifamily subscriber to have a say in what type of service they receive. Having the choice to disconnect and find something different, something better, something more affordable is only possible when there are multiple providers available who are each competing to earn customers by providing the best quality service. Concerns of asset management and protecting property investments make it understandable that landlords may have questions regarding timeframes for construction and methods to install telecommunications infrastructure and equipment, but the terms governing this work is negotiated and addressed within the language of a standard access agreement. The rights of tenants to access competitive information, options, and service offers should not be restricted by a landlord's different set of priorities and goals for these concerns. The FCC ruling against entering into exclusive access agreements is silent to a landlord's decision to just not engage with competitors. This scenario creates a default of preferred provider and denies the intention of ensuring that tenants have a choice of service. For these reasons, RCN encourages support for tenants' rights to access competitive broadband service and supports MC 122. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Came in under time, love it. Recognizing Rai Marcatilio McCracken on behalf of the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, 3 minutes, please.
Good evening. My name is Rai Marcatilio McCracken. I am a senior researcher specializing in broadband policy, speaking here tonight on behalf of the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. ILSR is a 47-year-old national nonprofit that tells the stories of and works with communities to build local power, invest in the right infrastructure, drive smart economic growth, fight monopoly power, and promote universal, affordable, fast internet access for everyone. ILSR is registering its support of this measure. Restrictive and exclusive wiring agreements in multi-tenant environments is anti-competitive, leading to monopoly practices which result in higher monthly internet access bills and lower quality connections. This disproportionately affects low-income households and those on a fixed income, which are more sensitive to the changing costs of essential goods and services. Joshua Steger, Deputy Director at New America's Open Technology Institute, has argued that, quote, "These sweetheart deals are one of the reasons the broadband market is so anti-competitive, particularly in urban areas. We need regulations that end these schemes," end quote. Likewise, the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society has argued that, quote, "Competition in multi-tenant environments will reduce broadband prices and help connect countless families who are struggling to afford this essential service," end quote. In a recent report, my organization showed how the city of San Francisco, a locally trusted ISP, and a regional nonprofit came together to address poor connectivity in 2 area affordable housing complexes. Instead of signing an expensive annual contract with Comcast to install expensive hallway Wi-Fi access shared by all, the initiative had succeeded in deploying long-term, low-cost, high-speed wired connections in the units themselves. Local challenges require local solutions, but options quickly disappear when exclusive wiring agreements preclude even the possibility of competition. In closing, I'd like to stress that it is important for local governments to do everything in their power to foster open, transparent, equitable, and just conditions for those living in multi-tenant environments, including when it comes to the connections which foster full participation in the economy, the ability to learn remotely, to visit the doctor, and to maintain the social connections which enable a healthy lifestyle. The Federal Communications Commission has so far declined to sufficiently regulate the industry to curtail this problem, which means it's time for local governments to step up and lead. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I see a couple members have raised their hands. If it's all right, I'd like to get through the support panel first, and then once we hear testimony, we'll take questions in the order in which people have raised their hands. Thank you so much. Recognizing Catherine Katzkin. She is an individual speaking in support.
Hi there. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, and thank you, Delegate Carr, for introducing this bill. I am in support of MC 122 because it will strengthen the service that our tenants receive. It will ensure that they have access to multiple wired broadband providers, and that they have choices and opportunities for the best service and the best prices. Which other people have mentioned is critical for participating in the economy of the modern times. And also because these choices will ensure more opportunity for them to access wired broadband which has been proven to be faster, more secure, more reliable, and also safer for the health of families. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are going to go a little out of order and recognize former Delegate Maricé Morales because she has to jump off shortly. She is testifying in support. 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening to my former colleagues and friends. I am indeed in support of Delegate Al Carr's MC 1-22. I speak to you as a homeowner, as a business owner, and as a current tenant at the Solaire in downtown Wheaton. And as a homeowner, I did have the ability to look at prices, and just doing a rudimentary, quick refreshing of the prices, you can see a very obvious monopoly of the two biggest companies, which is Xfinity and Fios. And so once you look at kind of after the second year and the third year, you know, the prices do change, and depending on your family size and if you're running a business out of your home, et cetera, the different packages would benefit your needs. Now, the third company that doesn't have a lot of access to the county, and that's because of the monopolies that we're living in, would be RCN. And when you look at the prices in the packages in under RCN, they're much more affordable. And now that I am also living in downtown Wheaton, I did not have an option. I was forced to take Xfinity, and I already know as a commercial tenant what that prices looks like after the second and the third year. So even though they get you the sweet price at the beginning, then the prices start to kick off in the second and the third year. And now living in a post-pandemic world where families are having to take turns on iPads, and knowing I personally know of families that are going into parking lots of certain commercial spaces because they simply cannot afford reliable broadband. This is an issue that is definitely of equity, of concern of equity. And for those reasons, I am asking for a favorable report, and I urge the delegation to support MC 1-22. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Ms. Morales. Now recognizing Robert Janku, 2 minutes, an individual in support of the bill. See in. I don't see him. Okay. Theodora Scarato, individual.
Robert is here. I'm sorry.
Oh, my apologies. Okay, Robert, you may go 2 minutes, please.
Thank you. I am in favor of giving renters the same access as homeowners to a wired internet. Renters should not be discriminated against. Don't be misled by wireless industry claims. Wired broadband provides the best internet access, high availability, more future-proof, better privacy, 10x lower energy use, and a proven safety record. DC Circuit Court judges ruled the FCC has not provided a reasonable analysis that wireless radiation is safe. I am strongly opposed to yet another licensing requirement and fee in the proposed bill. Why put an additional burden on the apartment owners? I like this legislation to be added as a provision to an existing license. I am worried about the precedent this bill could set by taking away more local control of rental agreements and moving it to state control. The idea behind this bill is great. We don't need a new license for this action. I don't know the political background nor legislative realities, but from a philosophical perspective, this effort should be moved to the affected local jurisdictions. Thank you.
Okay, so it sounds like maybe you're either a support with amendment or possibly opposed.
Yes, I think that's yes, with amendment.
Amendment. Okay. Thank you for that clarification, sir. Okay, so we are now moving to Theodora Scarato, individual, 2 minutes in support.
Great, thank you so much. I'm glad to be here, and I'm in really strong support of this bill. I am Executive Director of Environmental Health Trust, but I'm speaking to you as a resident of Montgomery County. Previous to working on federal issues and environmental health issues at the federal level, I have long worked in Montgomery County schools with families. I worked at an ADHD clinic, and I'm very familiar with families who are struggling, families with a range of socioeconomic statuses, mostly in apartments. And I really appreciate the challenge that our school system faced and that everyone faced when the world went online with the pandemic. And I go around actually the country talking about safe technology, and what I hear from families who are struggling is that it is too expensive. And what we need in order to solve the digital divide is wired broadband, which is affordable. And this is I'm just so thankful that this bill has been brought forward. There are a lot of commercials, promises from industry about bridging the digital divide, but the reality is that what it comes down to is following the money, and it's right here. I mean, this is a key piece that needs to be addressed in order to really provide for families who are not able to access the internet because they can't afford it. So I didn't want to copy what everyone else is saying, but I just wanted to add that, and thank you so much for considering this issue.
Thank you so much for your testimony. We are now moving on to Kimberly. I'm really sorry, I'm going to mispronounce your last name. Kasprak.
Thank you.
Thank you. In support 2 minutes. Thank you.
Yes, I am in support of Delegate Carr's Bill MC 122 as a 16-year resident of District 19 and 28-year resident of Montgomery County as a whole. But over the past 16 years, I have 16 years, I have been a renter, and I have not been able to get any choices. I have one choice for broadband, wired broadband. And 2 months ago, I moved in 2 years ago, and 2 months and 2 years. And 2 months ago, my internet bill went up by 38%. So I had, just like Ms. Morales said, that startup deal, and 38% more. That's not really in my budget, but I have to have it because I don't have a choice. I don't have any choice to change. I have inquired numerous times and have been told by Verizon that FiOS is not available in zip code 20906, which I know is untrue because I know people living in individual homes, homeowners who have FiOS. However, in the apartment complexes that I have lived, it's not available. And I don't have the exact language from my lease, but all tenants provide their own cable services. We negotiate with the companies themselves. However, Verizon can offer me DSL, which, as you all know, is not good for streaming multiple devices. At all. It's just not up there with what we need in today's society for anything accessing the internet. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Okay, so that concludes all of the individuals who are here to provide testimony orally. A couple of people submitted testimony in writing or could not join. And as Delegate Carr, Bill sponsor, mentioned, we have John Lyons here in his individual capacity, but he is able to answer questions. I apologize. I forgot his prior role. I think he was with Anne Arundel County. Is that right, Delegate Carr? Okay, thank you. So I see that there are a couple of members who have raised their hands. Thank you. If you wouldn't mind, since we had such a large group of individuals and organizations testifying, if you can please direct your question towards a specific person or entity, that would be very helpful. Recognizing Senator Lee for a question, please.
Thank you, Chairman Shetty. Can everybody hear me? This question is directed to probably towards Theodora and Delegate Carr. This looks like a good consumer protection bill, but I'd just like to ask some particulars about the provisions. This looks like an antitrust issue too. The apartment entities, under the current law, they are allowed to ban or restrict access to a particular carrier that wants to provide the services. Is that the current law right now? And is this true in other counties and jurisdictions? And are there other laws similar to this in the other counties that have changed this? Because this looks like an antitrust issue. Delegate Carr and Theodore, you could, I'm sorry, I didn't get the last name for Theodore. This, can you answer?
Yeah, I'll start. And I mean, this practice is legal. The FCC in 2007 did ban exclusive access arrangements, but as Arwen from RCN said, they were silent on some aspects of this. So it really is full of loopholes. So landlords are easily able to get around what the action that the FCC took in 2007. So there are a number of jurisdictions that have addressed this issue. You know, we're following in this bill the Anne Arundel County model that's been around for about 15 years.
Delegate Carr, is this an antitrust issue too? In the other jurisdictions,
I wouldn't call it antitrust per se. Maybe it is. I'm not very knowledgeable about that issue. It's an interesting way to look at it. But besides Anne Arundel County, Washington, D.C. has also addressed this in their law, and also I believe San Francisco, Oakland, I think New York State, I think Massachusetts. So there are a number of jurisdictions, state and local level, that have attempted to address this issue.
So they have been successful. So legislation has been passed to lift these bans and restrictions. So this is nothing new. Is that correct? Yes or no?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Collison for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think this question is either for Ms. Bain Crosby or Mr. Lyons. When there were questions of the sponsor, one of the concerns seemed to be the actual nuts and bolts and details on how to provide different wiring systems to multi-unit dwellings. How does it work, and how I guess maybe in Anne Arundel County, do you have buildings where there are multiple wired units or multiple wired providers that are negotiated individually by the tenant?
You want me to take it? Let's see. So not to go too far into the weeds, but you cannot have an individual subscriber before the infrastructure for the provider exists on the property. So the landlord would negotiate an agreement, that access or right of entry agreement with the telco provider. That dictates the terms of how we install our equipment or infrastructure onto the property. Depending on what type of infrastructure is installed, will determine whether or not we can share existing wiring that goes to each unit, or if we would need to run new wiring to each unit to create a new post wire. Along with the technology, what else might dictate that is just the overall infrastructure of the building materials, the walls, the hallways, things like that. But that's really where that comes together, is that before there is an individual subscriber, there has to be that overarching agreement that dictates this is the equipment, these are the hours that you can be in the building, these are the means of how you provide the service. And then there's language there that also rolls into how the franchise is dictated, of course, hours of customer service coverage and things like that.
That's really helpful. So, but just so I make sure I understand. So to provide those kinds of options, the landlord would need to have the infrastructure for the different options, right? So that's one question, but a follow-up from that, is there a minimum number that RCN would need in order to make it worthwhile putting the infrastructure into a facility?
I won't speak for other providers. For RCN, we do not charge the building owner to perform any of the construction work. Basically what we need is the permission to do the construction, which includes creating the riser, drilling up maybe between floors. Most apartment buildings, the lock boxes or the connections that go directly to each unit are located either in a hallway telco closet, trash rooms, other kind of communal common area spaces on each floor to allow that distribution of network. I'm sorry, I forgot the other part of this. No, we do not have a minimum number of subscribers. The only time that really applies is there's such a thing as a bulk, like with discount pricing and things like that. But in a retail setting, no, there's really no minimum. We would evaluate the cost of the construction, how many people we think we would get to determine a return on investment. But no, there's no obligation of the residents or the landlord to really produce subscribers. We would balance that over the term of how long we thought we would be allowed to be in the building.
Thank you very much. That was super helpful.
Thank you. Chair Barve.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to direct a question to the gentleman from Anne Arundel County. I forget his name.
Mr. Lyons.
Mr. Lyons. Okay. So I want to understand how the marketplace works in Anne Arundel County. First of all, you're saying that the Anne Arundel County law would be identical, the Montgomery County law would be identical to Anne Arundel County's if this bill passed. Is that the first thing you believe?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Okay.
With the major difference, of course, is that the licensing regulations in Anne Arundel County existed before the open access was put in, so that it didn't have to be a separate license. So it's just part of the overall license.
Okay.
So it's not something that has to be established uniquely to cable TV. It's more the other way around. Is if we had a landlord who just was not cooperating, basically revoke the entire license.
So explain to me how the transaction goes, because even though I'm a renter and in our building, we have both Comcast and Fios. They actually wired up all the units for Fios. I'm not super familiar with how this goes. So typically Comcast, let's just use them as an example since they seem to be the most broadly used in Montgomery County, I believe. So Comcast would say to a property owner, we'd like to run wiring to all your units, but we want an exclusive contract. Is that the way it typically goes?
Yes. The open access rule in Anne Arundel County is actually quite old.
Okay.
Anne Arundel County got into the cable business very differently than most jurisdictions. There were as many as 6 operators running in the county at one time. And I started in 1995. There were 4. In the late 80s, 2 of them started overbuilding each other, Jones Intercable and a company called Intermedia, with Intermedia being actually the incumbent operator. So this was enacted in the very late 80s to combat open warfare with the landlords basically bidding the companies back and forth to get the best deal, which obviously that deal would have to be passed on to the subscriber. And this was decades before the FCC had done anything.
Okay, so in today's world then, who pays the cost for wiring a building? Is that entirely paid for by the cable provider?
Yes, and again, since ours is established, it gets a bit complicated. A good example is I live in Anne Arundel County and I have access in this the building to 2 providers. So basically they both knew they had access to the building and they basically both coordinated with the management to install the infrastructure when the building was built.
And is it just one set of wiring or is it 2?
It's basically one set of wiring to the apartments. And like was talked about earlier from the people at RCN, there's a central closet and basically the service goes to the central closet. And then since Verizon is a different system than Comcast, there is a lot of separate equipment, but in the end, they're just using the coax cable that, runs from the central to the apartments without having to rewire anything.
So I don't know if you've seen this is my last question. I don't know if you've seen the bill that's been presented to us, but on
Yes.
page 4, it says a person who is issued a landlord license may require, number 1, compensation in exchange for allowing the installation of cable television systems. I don't understand. What does that mean? Does that mean that the landlord would be able to get a fee from the internet provider even?
Yes. And they have to refer right to Delegate Carr, but the way our law was written is we tried as hard as possible to maintain the rights of the property owner as much as we can, including making an allowance for what's called a one-time door fee. And other rules to basically, make the intrusion as, to no cost to the owner of the building.
Okay, Madam Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you. Delegate Resnick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of quick questions to Ms. Bain Cosby. I think you're sort of the expert here, so I'm going to refer to you. If we're talking about other multi-dwelling units that are not apartment buildings, I'm thinking specifically condominiums, where the owner is each individual unit owner versus a single owner for the entire building. Is there any issue ever with wiring a individual customer in an individual unit and having those vary from unit to unit?
Yes. The cost that it would take to install the required infrastructure to support that single owner would be prohibitive. Normally in a cooperative or a condo situation, we end up negotiating with the ownership representation, the board, or whomever the authorized broker is on that part. So if it's a cooperative board, or if they appoint their property manager to handle the specifics of an access agreement, then that's who we would settle with. And then we would wire the entire building so that everyone would have a choice.
So this is actually not where I thought this line of questioning would go. So let me ask this. So if I was a condo owner and I own the unit, but my HOA board had decided to sign an agreement with a different provider than my preference, I'm out of luck.
I have had that experience before, where a group of owners may have been shut out by the majority in their building. And then that's usually dictated by whatever the general rules are of their organization.
So how would that vary? How is that different, other than being a member of the HOA and having a vote where I could be outvoted? How would that be different from a renter who rents from a owner who then wires a bill, who makes an agreement with a provider and then provides that service to all the different units?
I definitely want to point back to Delegate Carr for this, but what I will do is speak to the experience I've had before, where there have been members of the condominium or the cooperative who've then just had to rally the troops. And sometimes we've been enlisted to help do education about what the limits to imposing on the property are, or what the benefits are to choice, things like that, informational mailings to help kind of sway the conversation in some way. But we've never stepped in to try to force the issue with a board or an association.
Okay, thank you. I was actually in favor of the bill up until this moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Delegate Resnick. Senator Kramer.
Thank you for that, Madam Chair. And yeah, there's some questions that I have that I think come out of what I heard from Delegate Chi, Delegate Cullison, Delegate Resnick, Delegate Bay, and I'm looking to maybe quickly go into this real world scenario that Delegate Chi mentioned. And I think Ms. Bain Cosby, I'm going to come back to you for a moment, please. So I am renting in an apartment. Let's say it's Arcola Towers. I am not happy with Comcast, and trust me, I am no big fan of Comcast, but they're the service provider to the building. So now I call your company, RCN, and I say, I want your service. I don't want Comcast service. Are you telling me that you are going to come in now and provide me in my apartment with your service if I make that request, should this bill pass?
What would happen next? Likely you would be speaking to someone in, let's say, our over-the-phone sales department. They would forward to myself or someone who's in my department your contact information. We would reach out to you for information about the decision makers affiliated with your property, and then start to lobby them about why RCN should be allowed to come onto the property.
And let's say under this bill, and please, I don't mean to be cutting you off, but I'm not getting quite to the point of my question. If this bill is law, and I am living in Arcola Towers in an apartment, and I call you and say, I want RCN providing me my internet service now. Are you all coming out there to install the internet?
Absolutely not. We would still need the permission to introduce our equipment onto the property. We would need space in some common area. Also, our technicians would need to be allowed into the building to perform work and connect to something that's attached to our network.
All right, but under this bill, as I understand it, you will have that access to the building. So the bill has passed. Let's say, and I'll say it one more time, this is now law. This bill passes. And I call you up and say, the building is wired right now for Comcast, but I am living in 302. I want RCN. Are you coming in and providing me with that service? Yes or no, ma'am?
Not without the agreement from the property owner.
Okay, we're going in a loop here. So under this bill, the building owner can't refuse you, if I understand correctly.
The building owner cannot refuse to enter into an agreement that dictates where and how we will install our equipment. We still need to install that equipment.
Okay, are you going to install it?
Yes.
Now by law is required to let you come in. Are you going to bring your fiber optic service into the building to my apartment?
As long as we have that agreement and we have infrastructure that is in proximity to your building, we would be highly likely to do that. It's a little bit of a...
The answer, ma'am, is not necessarily so. What you're equivocating and saying, well, if we have equipment, if we have, in other words, because I just quickly looked while this was going on. You do not provide internet service to where I reside. And so
that may be based on a few other.
My point to you, ma'am, and listen, again, I'm not defending Comcast or Verizon or anybody else, but I think we're hearing this impression that suddenly everybody is going to have the opportunity to have reduced pricing and lots of options for internet service, when in fact, you all may not come near the building. You may not come near the building unless an overwhelming majority of the tenants say to you, we want your service to make it financially worthwhile to RCN to trench your service to the building and then come into the building to provide the service. So passage of this bill does not necessarily mean by any means that someone is going to be able to switch to RCN. Now, the next question I have, and clearly this seems to be a bill that, heavily favored by RCN, and that's fine. I have no idea what the quality of your service may be compared to Fios or Comcast. But under the bill, as I understand it, and maybe this is for Mr. Lyons to answer, in Anne Arundel County is the company that is providing the new service. Are they required to post a bond for damage they may do to the building while they are installing this new cable service? How is the building owner protected from damage to the structure done by the cable company that they are now required to have come in and do construction in their building?
Sure. Depending on the agreement, they could require a bond. Most don't. There is some teeth in the actual code that says that the cable operator or internet operator is responsible for damages. My office, again, I was doing the job from 1995 through 2018. So when I was there, many times we would be the sort of the referee, but not really a referee, maybe sort of a coordinator. Because what you're talking about is anytime you are the renter and you're the first one asking, it obviously will take a little bit of time to get that sorted out. But once that is sorted out, every other person who asks, it will be matter of fact and done as quickly as would be done in a single family dwelling.
So real fast, Mr. Lyons, and I don't want to keep dragging this out. You're saying that somehow you all in county government were the referee.
Yes.
There is damage to the structure as a consequence of a company coming in that now has every right to come in. And we heard Ms. Bain Cosby talk about there's going to be drilling, there's going to be construction work in order to get the service up through the various floors of the building. And now there's significant damage structurally because somebody on the job goes, oops, I should not have drilled here, but I did. Are you going to ensure that that is repaired, or is the landlord now in court, the building owner in court, having to file suit to be made whole after having to do the necessary repairs? I understand you're saying cable company comes in and says, yeah, well, as part of the deal, we take responsibility. Now, all of a sudden there's damage and they're like, well, you know what? The plans didn't quite show what we ran into when we were, saw cutting the rebar through the concrete floor in this spot. And now we've done structural damage, but it's the landlord, it's the building owner's fault because the drawings weren't as shown. Who's gonna, can you see what I'm saying? You may go ahead as your position in Anne Arundel County government and say, oh yeah, cable company, you pay for it. That has no enforcement whatsoever.
It does.
Whomever it is that is the property owner is going to have to go and file suit to try to be made whole for the repairs to the structure. Do you understand what I'm saying?
No, but you didn't misunderstand. The way local franchises operate is that basically the companies have signed on, agreements, to do this, including bonding and such like that. No,
that's where the question began.
The cable operator to make the repairs. And the second thing, so I've been there 23 years. This hasn't come up at all. And I'm usually, when I was there, involved, in these where it was not matter of fact. A lot of buildings, particularly new ones, it's matter of fact to get the multiple operators in there. We would get called sometimes when a complex changes their property management and the new property management comes in, not understanding what's going on, and actually calls the cable operator to say, hey, I need, to see who's going to win to get this. And then they call me, and then we call them and remind them about the law. And they say, sorry for the problem.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Lyons. Thank you,
Sure.
Madam.
Thank you, Senator Creamer. And just a quick reminder to all of my colleagues, I know this is a bill that is new to us and we're all really excited about learning more about it, but we will likely have a work session scheduled. And for those who are interested in joining the EEH committee, including you, Senator Creamer, we would welcome you to join us. Are there any further questions from colleagues for the support panel? Great. Seeing none, thank you to those who have testified in support. We have two witnesses here present to testify in opposition. We will hear from them 3 minutes each, and then we will take questions from members of the delegation. So starting with Aaron Greenfield on behalf of the Maryland Multi-Housing Association in opposition, 3 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair Shetty, members of the delegation. Aaron Greenfield here on behalf of the Maryland Multi-Housing Association, whose members consist of owners and managers of more than 210,000 rental homes. I'm sorry, there's a dog in the background, and over 958 housing communities. You have our written testimony. We have submitted that. We come in opposition to this bill for the following reasons. As noted, this does require a new state license for Montgomery County housing providers only. Those housing providers will now be required to obtain a second license from the state in addition to the local required license. This is unnecessary and quite frankly unprecedented for this industry in the state. In terms of definitions, we've had the opportunity to meet with a sponsor, and we understand he's not wedded to some of the language in the bill, but it still has significant issues. For instance, the term for rent on page 3, line 19 does not seem to fit. Facility isn't defined on page 4, line 9, making the provision on page 4, line 8 completely unclear. And as Chairman Barve raised, the term tenant, the definition of tenant on page 4, lines 14 and 15, includes a person not a party to the lease. This is problematic by allowing any person to request service in a building they don't live in and cause property disruption. And speaking of property disruption, on page 4, lines 17 through 20, there's no limit to the amount of construction that could occur in a given community at a tenant's request. Property owners must have the right to approve the method of installment, cable routes, drilling, and the like. In terms of exclusive access, there's been a lot of discussion on that topic, and this legislation does prohibit exclusive access agreements. Importantly, as has been raised, in 2007, the FCC officially declared it unlawful to enter into these arrangements. And I give credit to Mr. Lyons, who I've known for a number of years. I think Anne Arundel County and Mr. Lyons were very much a pioneer in this before the FCC issued its federal ruling, which is important to note. We suggest allowing the FCC order to stand on its own rather than legislating this in one county in one state. And then lastly, it's important also to raise the fact that the FCC is currently reviewing the broadband competition in multiple dwelling unit buildings, which Delegate Carr did not raise. In September of 2021, the FCC invited comments on revenue sharing, exclusive wiring, and exclusive marketing agreements. This is currently being reviewed now. And we, again, urge the delegation to wait until resolution has been reached by the FCC and following the September invitation for comments. And for those reasons, would urge an unfavorable report. The last thing I might mention, my apologies, Chairman Shetty, is that what this bill doesn't account for, as you'll hear in the from Ms. Bradley, is the use of streaming services becoming an amenity in a lot of these apartment buildings, which is why perhaps there aren't two providers. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Greenfield. I have Ryan Washington with the Apartment and Office Building Association. Is there somebody else testifying instead?
No, it'll just be me this evening. Thank you, Madam Chair. And good evening, members of the Montgomery County delegation. My name is Ryan Washington. I serve as Government Affairs Manager for the Apartment Office Building Association, Metropolitan Washington, also known as AOBA. Can you all hear me? Perfect. I will not take up too much of your time. Aaron did an amazing job explaining everything and our grievances with the bill. Just a few things that I do want to highlight is, how the bill is duplicative regarding the FCC regulations from the Communications Act in 2007. In addition to that, we have reached out to members in Montgomery County where we do have residents that do utilize streaming services in addition to that, but many members in the county do provide free of options to residents to be able to have the option to pick whatever streaming service they would like, or cable service providers, whether it be Xfinity, Comcast, or RCN, Cox, DirecTV. If it entails a satellite, usually they usually allow it on the patio or some type of open fixture or balcony. But with that, I'd just like to sum up my arguments, and I'm open for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. Turning to members of the delegation now for questions, we'll start with Delegate Wilkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is for Aaron. Aaron, good to see you. Always appreciate your engagement on these issues. And I actually wasn't going to ask a question, but one word that you said stuck out to me and wanted to understand more what you meant. Use the word unprecedented. And since we just had this discussion about Anne Arundel County and their framework and how they utilize it, although it may be a little different in statute, but a similar intent and program, I'm just trying to understand more about what you mean by unprecedented. So you could explain that a little more. Thank you.
Sure, and Delia, great to see you as always. What I meant is in terms of the landlord license. What this bill does is it creates a second license effectively housed and maintained by the Circuit Court for Montgomery County. And so that is unlike anything we've seen in the industry, where you have a second license over and above a local license, which makes sense, right? It makes sense that Montgomery County issues its own license for inspection, and that's the appropriate thing. A number of large jurisdictions do the same. But to now have, for this specific provision in law, in Montgomery County only, a state license that's housed and maintained, and I'm not sure because the bill doesn't speak to the enforcement. We're not clear on who enforces this, but it's housed under Circuit Court for Montgomery County. I'm not aware in this industry of any similar statute.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Collison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And with your indulgence, I think I have two quick questions. The first one is for Mr. Washington. AOBA works with the District of Columbia, right?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, and I thought I heard the sponsor say that DC has a bill that accomplishes this intent and has had it in place for a while. So it's a little different, I guess, than Anne Arundel. So how does AOBA manage this in DC? What kinds of provisions, what kinds of things that did AOBA have to put in place in order to make it work in DC?
That is a great question. I would have to check with our DC members on that, but I can get back to you on that. That's a really great question that I'm taking note of.
Okay, I'm interested in specifics in terms of what, I'm thinking there need to be some kinds of agreements, templates, things like that. So, if you can get us that information, it would be great.
Absolutely.
And it's good to see you, Ryan, as well, not just Aaron, Hi, Aaron. So I think it was you who was saying, let's take some time and wait until the FCC makes its decisions about the areas that we're really concerned about here, the infrastructure pieces, and I guess, where do you think the FCC is right now? Is there a timeline? What's your inside information on how this is progressing and where they're going?
Yeah, I don't have a specific answer. I'm not skilled on FCC practices, Delegate. I do think they're taking a hard look at these areas of revenue sharing, if they exist, as well as exclusive wiring, which is an issue, and this idea of exclusive marketing agreements, which has been ruled as legal under the FCC. So I think they're taking a fresh look under, particularly as the sponsor mentioned, under the president's a call to action on this issue. So I don't have a specific timeline. I know it's convenient for me to say, let's wait for the FCC and kick the can down the road. I understand that. But since they just issued this invitation on September 7th, and they're looking at several of these areas, we just think it's in the state's best interest to wait to do that versus, frankly, legislating in one county in one state on this particular topic.
And I appreciate that. Thank you. And I think those three areas are the areas that this bill is exactly meant to address. So, I think it's, we're either being prescient with the FCC or, we are just having to wait for them to catch up. So thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Delegate Collison. Mr. Washington, in response to your comment that you'll get feedback back, if you wouldn't mind, please sending that to Rebecca Stryer, our delegation aide. And that way, I think there might be several of us who would love to see that response, and she can forward it to the delegation.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Perry, I'm sorry, but we cannot recognize you. You are part of the support panel, and we only are recognizing members of the delegation who have questions of our opponents at this time. But if you have further feedback, feel free to email any of us. Recognizing Delegate Solomon, my district mate, for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Aaron, it's good to see you. I just had actually sort of a similar question to Delegate Collison. So, absent, I think the licensing duplication issue, which it sounds like the sponsor of the bill may be open to tweaking or looking at sort of some other construct that may be a little bit more efficient. Sort of the same question that Delegate Collison asked Ryan. So you all operate obviously in Anne Arundel County as well. And so I guess my question to you is how do your buildings navigate this with multiple providers? And couldn't we just sort of duplicate a similar system in Montgomery County, absent obviously the licensing issue, which, reading your testimony seems like a pretty legitimate concern, but in terms of the actual bringing in of providers, how do your buildings in Anne Arundel County navigate that?
That's a great question. And I'm sorry that, the one party that's not at the table here are the cable companies. Because I think it would be really helpful to get a sense from them on what would entice them to provide more competition to certain facilities. I will say that under the FCC order and under what Anne Arundel County did, which I think was before FCC's ruling, and again, a lot of credit to Mr. Lyons, he's done a tremendous job. I think I think it's already prohibited. So if we want a second provider to come in, if you as a tenant want a subscriber to come in, cable facility to come in, you can. The question, I think, pivots, as we heard from the earlier questioning from Chairman Kramer, that this also becomes kind of a business decision by the cable company. And I think that's where there's a little bit of gray area.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also, but obviously, as Senator Kramer was saying, they still have to be allowed into the building. And so, I mean, maybe sort of the way that Ryan's going to do some research with his DC folks. I mean, if you could talk to some of your buildings in Anne Arundel County and get back to us, I think that would be really helpful.
Will do. Thank you, Delegate. I'll do that.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there further questions for our opponent panel? Seeing none, I just want to draw the attention to my colleagues that we have a number of groups and individuals who have submitted written testimony, MCPS Board of Education in support, Lisa Klein, an individual in support, and Karen Rhodes, an individual in support. So that concludes the bill hearing on MC 122. Those who have testified or are not testifying on further hearings may drop off of the Zoom. We will now turn to MC 422, Montgomery County Board of Education election of members. This is being sponsored by Delegate Moon. All of the testimony is written, so we are only hearing from our bill sponsor this evening. I will recognize him for the time he requires.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
MC 422 would reform how we elect school board in Montgomery County. Currently, Board of Ed races in Montgomery are among the biggest contests in the state, with over 1 million residents required to be reached per office. There obviously, that makes them the biggest contests and the biggest election districts in Montgomery County, because alongside the county executive, all 7 school board members are elected countywide by all the voters. Even though we draw 5 school board districts and purport to only have 2 at-large school board members, they're essentially all 7 are countywide at-large million-person election districts. This is in no way a local office. So MC 422 would take that system and instead have it more closely match our county council elections, whereby we have a mix of at-large seats to get a countywide perspective, and we have district seats to get a local perspective. So again, we currently have 7 school board members, 2 at-large, 5 districts, all elected countywide. This would change it to 2 at-large, 5 districts. 5 districts elected only by the voters in that district. So does this sound familiar? It should, because in the House of Delegates, we already voted for this earlier when we supported House Bill 655 by Delegate Crosby. You may remember the exciting floor debates about local governance, but House Bill 655 would have banned the practice of forcing county officials who run in districts to be approved by all of the voters countywide. That bill included the Montgomery County Board of Education, along with 5 other school boards, along with the county commissions in St. Mary's, Charles, Calvert, Queen Anne's, and Garrett. Members of the county delegation voted unanimously in support of this bill, but it did not advance through the Senate. So why was House Bill 655 brought? It was brought out of Voting Rights Act concerns in multiple counties. And in fact, the League of Women Voters, who is supporting this bill and supported the statewide bill, points out that in 1851, the Maryland Constitution was written requiring voting at large to assure control of minorities. In 1985, Dorchester County's system, which was just as I described, was challenged in federal courts as a Voting Rights Act violation and brought a change to the Maryland Constitution. So the county council itself has evolved, as you know, public financing, 2 additional district members. Things are changing, and that was done out of a sense that the 5 county council districts were in fact themselves too large for a county now of 1 million people. As you've heard me point out in prior testimony related to the school boards, these are races that typically draw $10,000 or $20,000 of candidate financing and spending in a district that is 8 times larger than ours. And so you have to ask me and tell me on what basis these elections are being decided. So that is the bill in a nutshell. It's supported by the county executive, the League of Women Voters. The teachers are currently discussing this through their process. The county council is still mulling it over. The school board doesn't like it themselves. They typically, sometimes they stay out of these conversations, but I had a chat with at least one school board member who raised the possibility of fringe candidates winning office. But I'll tell you, this is, again, a 200,000 person district election. If we go to something that is still the largest district size in Montgomery County, we have 7 county council districts, 8 delegate and Senate districts, and this would still make school board the largest election district in Montgomery County, among the largest in the state, and voters would still have a primary with which to consolidate and force candidates to gain additional support and stop fringe candidates for winning. So that's all to say. I don't expect huge changes from the bill, but we are all swimming in the direction of democracy. And I don't think it makes sense to have every single school board member in all of our neighborhoods be voted on by the voters of Tacoma Park or Chevy Chase, for that matter, granting a veto power to a bare majority for local district elections. So I'm happy to answer any questions, chit chat about it. You have written testimony in your Google Drives.
Thank you, Delegate Moon, for your testimony, for your bill, and for the nice shout out to both your district and mine. So I will recognize Delegate Kaiser for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate Moon, thank you for this bill, and certainly I believe we were all supportive of Delegate Crosby's bill last session. My question for you is twofold. One, the effective date on the bill is July. The primary is before July. Also, our Board of Elections are, right now, we have, 65 ballot styles in the county? And given the districts that we already approved last week, this would presumably create, given all the crisscrossing, potentially hundreds of different ballot styles. And the Board of Elections is wary of making any quick changes this next session. Did you speak to our local Board of Elections?
I did not. These are all very astute points from our capable and learned Ways and Means sage who has amassed years of election arcanery and knowledge. So thank you for your service. It's from me and the rest of the delegation, truly appreciated. And as you're demonstrating here, you got me. We might need to look at the effective date on this one.
And you might think of delaying it by 2 years.
Thank you, Delegate Kaiser. Thank you, Delegate Moon. Do any other members of the delegation have questions of our bill sponsor? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Delegate Moon, for your bill, and Delegate Kaiser for the great points. That concludes the bill hearing for MC 422. We are going to move on to MC 522, Montgomery County Board of Education Student Member Scholarship, requested by Delegate Luedtke. We do have a couple of members testifying as individuals in support, and then we have the remainder of the testimony in written form. So we will start with our bill sponsor, Delegate Luedtke.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm going to remind folks a little bit of the history of this issue. First of all, you'll recall that 4 or 5 years ago, we passed legislation creating a compensation commission process for the Board of Education, which was the only elected body in Montgomery County that didn't have a compensation commission process at the time. That commission was appointed, made its recommendations a couple years ago. We considered legislation that was rooted in those recommendations. Unfortunately, that legislation was proposed during the pandemic session in 2020, and a lot of the conversations unfortunately fell on the cutting room floor as we were dealing with how to respond to the pandemic. There will be another iteration of the Compensation Commission appointed after next year's election to again look at the issue of Board of Education Compensation Commission and make recommendations, just as they do for us, at the state level, just as they do for the county council. But one piece that I wanted to continue to try to address, that is the piece of the compensation for the commission, for the Board of Education, that has gone the longest without being addressed, is the compensation related to the student member of the Board of Education. So the last time that there was any increase in the SMOBS scholarship, because rather than receiving a direct payment, they receive a scholarship in compensation for their service to the county. The last time that was changed was 2002. And you can imagine that, simple inflation since 2002 has been significant. Higher education inflation has been much more significant than the regular rate of inflation. So what this bill proposes to do is not only to solve this problem in the short term, but to hopefully solve it to some extent in the long term. It would increase the student member of the board scholarship to be commensurate with the tuition fees, room and board at the highest cost university within the USM system in any given year. And what this would do practically for not the current student member of the board, obviously, but the next student member of the board, is it would mean that that student member of the board would receive a scholarship that would be similar to, approximately equal to, what adult members of the board receive. And that we wouldn't necessarily, if we chose not to, we would never have to necessarily address it again, because it would naturally grow as the cost of higher education would grow. So I think it's kind of a simple solution to the problem of trying to make sure that we're not waiting 20 years in between increases in this scholarship. As you know, the student members of the board historically have been absolutely fantastic, do incredible work for the county, are well-informed and participate in every aspect of the school system's policymaking processes. So they absolutely deserve adequate compensation for their time and service to the county. And I'd ask the delegation for a favorable report.
Thank you, Majority Leader, for your bill and for your testimony, recognizing Hannah Aluni, who I believe is our current SMOB. Oh, I'm sorry. Before we do that, we have a question of the bill sponsor, it looks like. Delegate Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate Lukey, for bringing this bill. I am a strong supporter of raising the scholarship amount or the compensation amount for student members. As you laid out, I think it's long overdue. My question is just dates back to a discussion we did have during the 2020 legislation surrounding students who do not attend college. And I was just wondering, I think I only skimmed the bill, but is there any compensation available for student members who choose not to attend higher education of some form?
There isn't under current law. There wouldn't be under this bill. To my knowledge, we've never had a SMOB who hasn't gone on to pursue some form of higher education. It's definitely a valid issue, and you'll recall I supported the amendment a couple of years ago to make that possible. But you know, I think I would rather see something passed than nothing, and I don't want to run into what we ran into a couple of years ago. So.
Yep, touche. Okay, appreciate it.
Thank you for the question. My apologies, I almost missed you. Okay, recognizing Hannah Aluni for 5 minutes.
Great. Good evening. My name is Hannah Oluni, and I am the current student member of the Montgomery County Public Schools Board of Education, affectionately known as the SMOB here in Montgomery County. Here to share my personal support for MC 522. Though I want to be clear that this bill will take effect on, if passed, on July 1st, the very day my term ends. I truly believe that increasing the financial compensation for this position is key to increasing the diversity of candidates who run for office in addition to just compensation for the work that is done. Each year, all 10th and 11th grade students in MCPS are invited to file for candidacy to hold my current position. Each year, however, only 10 to 20 students actually take advantage of this opportunity, the vast majority of which come from the highest income portions of our county. Last year, not a single student from the Northeast Consortium ran for office. The last time a student from the Northeast Consortium held this office was 15 years ago, before I was in preschool. If we want students from diverse socioeconomic backgrounds to run for office and feel like the Board of Education is something that is attainable and financially possible, it is imperative that the SMOB scholarship be raised considerably. Representation matters, and this bill is key to making leadership in education and government a reality for portions of our community that have been underrepresented for far too long. Yes, the experience you gain from being an elected official at 17 is considerable, but experience does not pay student loans. Aside from candidate diversity, it's important for our students to know that they should always be justly financially compensated for their work. In addition to board meetings, committee work, and considerable reading, which are the responsibilities of any board member, as the student member, I visit 4 to 6 schools across Montgomery County Public Schools each week, attend club meetings, sit on individual student calls, basically working a full-time job while managing a full course load and trying to make my own money. This position asks students to put 110% of themselves and more into this work in order to do it right. And it is only just that our district make that same investment into their compensation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Recognizing Board of Ed member Lynn Harris for testimony and support. She is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And thank you, Delegate Lutke, for introducing this bill again. And I can really only echo so much of what my colleague Hannah has just expressed. I've had the privilege over the past many years to work alongside many different student members of the board, and in the past 375 days, had the privilege of working alongside 2 student members of the board as colleagues on the board. And, you know, it can't be expressed more directly, the power of the work these students do, the transformative nature of their influence in the county and on the board, and the value that they bring. They truly represent the on the ground experience of the customers of the school system. And without that view, and we don't have enough of that in my opinion, but without that very direct expression of how every decision made inside that school system and by that Board of Education impacts the students in the buildings, we can't do the work that we need to do. We can't make the best decisions that we can. And you know, you're looking at the student member of the board is a co-equal member. They do as much work. They have an equal responsibility for decisions on that $2.6 billion operating budget and that $400 million capital budget. They, you know, multiple committee assignments, multiple special meetings. They work as hard or harder than anybody else. There's no reason they should be compensated any less. And I just have to acknowledge in particular, one part of Hannah's testimony is the equity issue. And this pertains equally to those of us who are not student members of the board. But the hours that we work are gargantuan. The salary is a pittance, and it is an equity issue that unless you are, as Hannah alluded to, a student whose family is able to otherwise provide them support, or an adult who is wealthy, comfortably retired, or gainfully employed with an incredibly flexible profession, you cannot even contemplate running for this office. And that is an equity issue that cannot be solved until the salary issue is fixed. And so I see these 2 issues as interrelated. And I think this also relates to Delegate Stewart's bill. I don't think we should be contemplating adding another seat till we make it an equitable opportunity for people who are the customers of the system to run for that seat. I cannot strongly enough support this bill. And I also appreciate the fact, as Delegate Lutke mentioned, that it builds in an inflation factor, because the compensation for the student member of the board is always tied to the current cost of that year of education in the highest cost university in the University of Maryland system. And I think that is also gets to the equity. Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing what this session brings.
Thank you so much, Ms. Harris. We have David Naiman testifying in support of the bill. Is he present?
I am. Thank you, Chair Shetty and members of the delegation. My name is David Naiman. I am here tonight as an individual to support MC 522 to increase the scholarship amount for the student member of the Montgomery County Board of Education. I'd like to thank Delegate Lutke for introducing this bill, and I'd like to associate myself with everything that the current student member, Hannah O'Looney, said. As some of you may know, I served as the first Montgomery County Student Board member several decades ago, and when I served in ancient times, I received no salary or scholarship for my board service and only was reimbursed for expenses sometimes. In fact, the board president elected in the middle of my term at first refused to pay for some of those very minimal expenses. I am glad that today we've progressed and the Board of Education and the county executive support this legislation. Being a high school student and a board member is more than a full-time job, and the student members, including Hannah, who's the 44th student member, but definitely not limited to her, more than earn their scholarships as compensation for their hard work and contribution to the board's deliberations. To me, the biggest reason to support this bill is to allow students of all economic backgrounds the opportunity to serve. I grew up in Silver Spring and attended Northwood High School, but the next 4 students to serve after me all attended Churchill or Whitman high schools and lived in Bethesda or Potomac, as did 7 of the first 13 student members to serve. Many students need to help pay for college, and they should be able to serve as the student member as well. There have been students who've had part-time employment while serving on the board, but that's very difficult to do. It took almost 25 years to establish the $5,000 scholarship in 2002. And when Delegate Lutke said that that was the last time it changed from 0 to 5,000 in 2002. But students have come from a wider variety of locations in the county in the years since then. 18 students from 13 different high schools have served since the scholarship was enacted almost 20 years ago. Students of all economic backgrounds should be able to serve, and providing a larger scholarship would make it easier for students from all parts of the county and all economic backgrounds to have that opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Naiman, for your testimony. I had forgotten that you were the first SMOB. That's so funny and so interesting. Thank you for that. Recognizing Delegate Kelly for a question.
Thank you so much, Chair Shetty, and thank you, Delegate Lutke, for bringing this bill. Love it. I just love it so much. But I think all of you know I'm struggling with the challenges of financing college, as my daughter is in her senior year as well. And my question was for Hannah, actually, and a little bit reflecting on the testimony of everyone we heard. I'm remembering my senior year in high school, and I was working at Blockbuster Video and Everything Yogurt and saving up money to pay for college. And we heard from Mr. Naiman that's just really unlikely. So it's sort of a 2-part question I have for you. One is sort of, can you tell us a little bit more about the time? We all see, of course, the work that the student member of the board has done from our side. But I would love to hear a little bit more about the time that you spend, the time commitment that this job has, and how that would impact someone's ability to have other jobs to save up money for school. But also, so the time commitment, but also the second part of my question is really, I'm so interested, having seen this as a legislator for years, the work that the student member does being so tremendous, but also as a parent of high school and a middle school student, sort of the role that the student member of the board plays, not just on the board, but with your peers in the school, and sort of why it might be important to have diverse candidates in this role in terms of the impact that would have on other students.
Wonderful questions, Delegate Kelly. Thank you so much for those. Starting with the first one about the time commitment. I know when I do informational sessions at schools like Northwood, Blair, Watkins Mill, encouraging students to run, the number I think that we sort of use just to give students an idea of the time commitment is 40 hours a week. Although sometimes it can be more than that. And I think what is particularly difficult about this job, as I'm sure you are aware, being holding local office as well, is just how unpredictable the schedule can be, right? Tomorrow I have a meeting from 11 to 1, and then one from, 3 to 4, and then 4:30 to 5. It's very, very unpredictable. And that can mean late nights, it can mean weekends. So it would be very difficult for someone to hold an hourly wage job in that way. So that's one thing that I would say. It also means missing a lot of school and finding flexible time and finding transportation to be able to stay at school early mornings and late nights to be able to make up that work. The second thing I want to address is your second question about the second role that the SMOB has, which I would argue is actually, in a lot of cases, the more important role the student member has in sort of promoting civic engagement for students, right? I think so often students just accept that their schools are the way they are because that's the way that they've been presented to them. But this position, especially for our younger students, and that's why I appreciate the fact that our election system starts at the middle school level. Just participating in an election at that young age encourages students to think about who is making their decisions, and the fact that we live in a democratic system where they get a voice. in that process. So yeah, that's something I really appreciate about this position. And I can see students getting excited about having a voice at the table, about civic engagement, which is really wonderful and something that I don't see in our neighboring counties that don't have as strong of a culture surrounding this position. So yeah, that's another thing I would say. One last thing about the time commitment and connecting it back to your second question as well is just the amount of time it takes to make sure that you're connecting with the community is something I've really invested in this year and that I'd like to see my future student members continue to do, is investing time into engaging with the community, not just students who will come out to events like these or come out to Board of Education meetings, but students who don't know or don't care, I find can often provide the best, most valuable information to inform our school system. But that takes real effort and time. So thank you.
Thank you so much for your answers, Hannah, and for your service. We are all so much better off for it. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Hannah. And thank you, Delegate Kelly, for your questions. Does anyone else in the delegation have any questions of our witnesses? Okay, seeing none, I want to point out that we have a couple of pieces of written testimony in the file. Montgomery County Executive and MCPS Board of Ed have both submitted written testimony in support, and the Montgomery County Council is listed as having submitted written testimony, but their position is not yet decided. So that concludes the hearing on MC 522. We are moving on to MC 1622, Montgomery County Board of Education membership bill that is requested by Vice Chair Stewart. I will note that we have one witness, Sunil Dasgupta, who is signed up in support. However, I understand that he is unable to join us this evening. So we will be hearing from Delegate Stewart, and then we will have questions, and then that will conclude this bill hearing. So I will turn the floor to Vice Chair Stewart.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So this bill came out of conversations that actually Chair Shetty and I had with members of the House delegation over the interim about the future structure of the school board and whether or not there should be any changes made. And it's probably no secret to you that a supermajority of the House delegation seems to support in some way, shape, or form Delegate Moon's bill that we heard earlier. And I too am a strong proponent of moving to an in-district voting system. But many members of the delegation also expressed some hesitation or thought that any negative effects from in-district voting could be balanced out to some degree by adding an additional at-large member to the school board. And so that is what this bill, MC 16-22 does. It adds an additional at-large member. Currently, as most of you or all of you probably know, there are 8 members of the school board. There are 5 quote unquote district members who are obviously elected at large. There are 2 at-large members who are also, of course, elected at large, and then 1 student member, Hannah, who we heard from and who I think was remarkable. And so I view this as a companion bill to Delegate Moon's bill. And by that, I mean that if his bill does move forward, I think adding an additional at-large member has some obvious benefits. However, if his bill does not move forward in either the House or Senate, there's probably less need for this bill. But I think that there are 2 rationales for adding an additional at-large member, at least 2. One is just to provide a better balance between in-district and at-large members. The basic justification for at-large members in general, sort of in the political science literature, is that they're more likely to work toward the best result for the whole community rather than pander to the specific demands of only parts of the community. And several studies have also found that at-large systems have the benefit of increasing the number of women elected to office. On the flip side, single member districts provide benefits of localized democracy. And in diverse places like Montgomery County, single member elections also promote racial and ethnic diversity. And so that's why many jurisdictions, including Montgomery County with its county council, have crafted a bit of a Goldilocks approach between these 2 models to essentially try to create best of both worlds with both single member and at-large districts. And so on the council currently, at-large members make up 44%. But that will soon decline to 36%. This bill would move the school board from 25% at large to 33% at large, so very close to the proportion that the county council will soon have. And so most residents would be represented by 4 of the 9 members of the school board. And then, of course, MCPS students would actually be represented by 5 of the 9 members, a majority. And then the second reason for the bill is to avoid tie votes. And so, with apologies to all the soccer fans out there, ties are bad. And that's why the Maryland State Senate, the House of Delegates, the Board of Public Works, the Montgomery County Council, on and on and on, feature odd numbers. And we saw an example of the ugliness that can emanate from a school board tie in Howard County earlier this year, where the Howard County School Board gridlocked or deadlocked on a number of issues. And some parents who I think held somewhat reactionary views used the tie vote to essentially scapegoat the student member and use it as an excuse to take away the student member's voting rights because it was their fault that there was a tie. Now, I'm not saying that this exact, such a hypothetical will play out in Montgomery County that way. I would certainly hope it would not. But if we do move to in-district voting, which again, I fully support, we're much more likely to have more contentious issues, more close votes, because the members are not going to all be beholden to the exact same electorate as they are now, which is the full county. And so, while that's good, and I think that we'll have more diverse viewpoints, we'll get more disagreement. And so I think this bill would be nice because we would actually have an odd number of folks on the school board and we will not have any ties. And then that's basically it. The last thing I'll note is the school board has voted to oppose the bill. And my understanding of the rationale, as actually board member Harris, I think eloquently said earlier, is they don't love the idea of adding another member while the board itself remains grossly underpaid. And I absolutely respect that view. I agreed. I think that all 8 of them are grossly underpaid. However, I will point out that this board member in the bill wouldn't be on the ballot until 2024. So I would hope that by the time they're sworn in 2025, the General Assembly will have approved a pay raise by that time. And so with that, I urge a favorable report.
Thank you, Vice Chair Stewart, recognizing Delegate Kaiser for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate Stewart. I was going to ask a question about the staggering, so thank you for clarifying that piece. I really appreciate that you mentioned that you want to do this, or part of your rationale was to enhance gender and racial diversity, because 4 of the members right now are people of color. But I just assume, I can't speak for the men of our delegation, but until tomorrow morning, we have an all-woman board. So I think you are so right to be thinking about gender diversity. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate the comment.
Thank you, Delegate Kaiser, recognizing Delegate Queen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate Stewart, for bringing this bill. I was just asking, this is a general question. Had you ever thought of, instead of adding another adult member, that the other member should be another student? And then you could do a gender diversity for that. And you can also encourage students from the unrepresented areas to maybe get into the race, because with students coming from certain schools already, they kind of have a one up on how to do this kind of thing. And that might get us even more diversity and recognized voices.
Yeah,
just a thought.
So Delegate Queen, I actually did think of this. This was actually one of my first ideas that I shared your passion for. But when I polled members of the delegation on these various ideas, and many of you that I called may remember this conversation, I polled 3 options, actually. I polled, what do you think of a teacher member of the board? I polled, what do you think about an additional student member of the board? And they could be split any number of ways. They could be split by gender, as you say. It could be split by parts of the county, which, as someone who represents a part of the county that doesn't tend to yield a whole lot of SMOBs, I certainly see the value in that as well. And then I polled the at-large member. And honestly, the reason that we went with this version of the bill is not because it's the one that I like the most, but it's the one that had the most support in the House delegation. And so, if folks are persuaded that a student member would be a better way forward, Delegate Queen, you and I are both proud members of the EEH committee. That's something we could work out with amendments. So in short, I'm open to the idea, but I think that our best shot of adding any member and breaking this potential tie scenario based on the conversations we had over the interim appears to be an additional at-large member.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from members of the delegation? Seeing none, thank you, Delegate Stewart, for your testimony and for your legislation. As I mentioned at the start, Sunil Dasgupta was listed as an individual in support. He is not able to attend this evening, and the MCPS Board of Education has submitted written testimony in opposition. That concludes the bill hearing on MC 1622. We are now moving into the last of the EEH bills, MC 1322, Montgomery County voting methods. I would like to gently remind my wonderful colleagues that we have passed this bill in prior sessions, I believe in identical or near identical form. The bill sponsor will address that, Delegate Plakovich-Carr. We do have quite a few people signed up to testify in support. And then we have one informational person. I'll put them on the same panel so we can get through everybody. The remainder are written testimony. So we will do our testimony from our bill sponsor, questions from members of the delegation, then all of our witnesses, and then questions for them. Recognizing our bill sponsor, Delegate Plakovich-Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, colleagues. For the record, Delegate Julie Plakovich-Carr here to present MC 13-22. And I'll say this is actually my first local bill that I've ever sponsored. But as the chair mentioned, this is legislation that the delegation is familiar with. This legislation was sponsored last year by Delegate Acevero and back in 2019 by Senator Kagan and Delegate Lukey. And both of those bills did unanimously pass our local House delegation. So I won't take the time tonight to speak to the merits of the bill, but just want to highlight a few technical things. First of all, the bill as introduced is identical to what passed our delegation last year, including the amendments that passed last year. That said, there is a sponsor amendment that would do two things. The first just clarifies the flexibility that the county would have under the legislation to choose which local offices could either have ranked choice or approval voting. And last year, there was a little bit of debate in terms of what the exact language of the bill meant, but we're just trying to make clear with the amendment that the county could choose to implement the alternate voting method for one, some, or all of those offices. The second part of the amendment would remove the judge of the Orphans Court from the list of local offices. It came to our attention after we introduced the bill that that is actually not an elected office, that instead actually judges of the Circuit Court for Montgomery County, and actually one other county in Maryland, serve in that role. So the amendment would remove that office from the list of local offices. But with that, I'm happy to take any questions or otherwise turn it over to the stakeholders.
Thank you so much, Delegate, for your bill and your testimony. Do any members of the delegation have questions of the bill sponsor? Seeing none, we will turn to our stakeholders, recognizing Barbara Nouveau on behalf of Do the Most Good organization in support. 3 minutes, please, or less if you want.
I'll do my best. Thank you, Madam Chair Shetty, Delegate Plakovich-Carr for sponsoring the bill this year, and all the members of the delegation. As said, my name is Barbara Nouveau, and I'm the Executive Director of Do the Most Good, a grassroots organization with over 3,000 members, the majority of whom live in Montgomery County. We focus on elections and on making our democracy work for everyone. Since our founding in December of 2016, we've been active in over 75 elections inside and outside of Maryland. I've testified, I counted 5 times in support of this legislation, authorizing Montgomery County to adopt ranked choice voting or approval voting for certain local races. Our reasons for supporting this legislation haven't really changed over the years, but today's national political climate demands that we must strengthen the protections and put in place the enhancements that will let the voice of every person be heard, and ranked choice voting is one of those enhancements. Across America, 22 jurisdictions from New York City to Tacoma Park use ranked choice voting in their most recent election. RCV was on the ballot in this past November in cities in Michigan, Maine, and Colorado, and won in all 3. 53 jurisdictions intend to use RCV in an upcoming election. It's time for Montgomery County to join their ranks. Thanks to the restructuring of our county council that takes effect in 2022, residents of the East County will finally have a district of their own, and with it, the opportunity to elect a council member who will put them first. Don't they also deserve a voting method that will help them to ensure that each person's voice is heard and that the candidate elected is preferred by a majority of those voters? In 2018, you'll remember, our county council elections demonstrated that a plurality-based system it's not unusual in a plurality-based system for the winner to be affirmatively disliked by a majority of voters. Candidates in single seat races won with 25 or 35% of the vote. Winners in multiple seat races won with as little as 8% of the vote. It's no surprise that many voters felt unheard. We can and we must do more and better, and not just for the East County, but for the entire county. With 2 more district seats having been added to the county council in 2022, we can expect another highly competitive election that would benefit greatly from RCV. Efforts to field more women and more minority candidates will, as before, put many like-minded candidates into competition with each other. RCV would elevate the candidate who was approved by the majority of voters, as opposed to the one who received the largest plurality, no matter how small it was. In sum, RCV amplifies the voices of the people being represented. It helps to ensure the majority of voters view the winners favorably, and it destigmatizes minority party candidates, too often viewed as spoilers. Do the Most Good strongly supports MC 13-22 and urges a favorable report on the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nouveau. We really appreciate it. Recognizing Michelle Whitaker on behalf of Ranked Choice Voting Maryland and one of my D18 constituents. 3 minutes, please.
I'm very happy to be a D18 constituent and happy to be with all of you this evening. Hello, my name is Michelle Whitaker. I am the statewide coordinator for Ranked Choice Voting Maryland, and we are a grassroots coalition working to expand voting across Maryland. And you're going to hear from several of our coalition partners. So I'm going to just be very brief. I hope to be brief with what I'm saying, that we fully support this bill and we support the amendments that is being put forth to make sure that we have expanded options, and recognizing that this bill empowers our local government to do what they do best, which is to respond and innovate for our residents. And by giving Montgomery County the ability to evaluate and use new voting methods, we empower our voters and ensure that democracy across the DMV continues to be open and available to all. And our Marylanders really do deserve elections that are fair and modern. And I just want to share 3 reasons what we've seen with Montgomery, ranked choice voting being used for over 2 decades here in Tacoma Park, as well as across the United States. First, more women and people of color are being elected to office. Studies of ranked choice voting have shown that women have won over more than 40% of all RCV contests. Women of color have won almost a quarter of all RCV contests, and people of color have won 60% of those RCV contests. And they're winning in more cases compared to cities that do not use RCV that are comparable. Secondly, RCV moves us forward to gender parity and gives more opportunities for marginalized communities. 7 cities that are using RCV have already achieved gender parity. And in 2020 elections, Salt Lake City, Utah voters used ranked ballots for the first time, and they were able to elect a diverse and majority LGBTQ council. And third, voters understand ranked choice voting. An exit poll in New York City from the most recent elections this year, for the first time that city using it, showed that 75% of voters want to use ranked choice voting again, with 95% of voters finding ranked ballots simple and easy to fill out, and 83% of those voters participating in the election ranking more than one candidate on their ballot. We have overwhelming data that shows that it's effective, and this enabling legislation does not mandate the use of a voting method, but simply gives our county the ability to implement a voting method that it desires. I urge a favorable report, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Whitaker. I'm recognizing Leslie Milano on behalf of the Montgomery County Women's Democratic Club for 3 minutes. Also a D18 person, like half the panel. It's amazing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. My name is Leslie Milano, and I'm the president of the Montgomery County Women's Democratic Club, WDC. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify concerning an important WDC priority for the next legislative session. And thank you all, by the way, for all the work that you're doing. It's certainly a long night and only one of many, many, many for sure. For you. We support this enabling legislation for 2 reasons. It's time to have a full-fledged public conversation on alternate voting methods in our county. Interest in reform is high among citizens and elected officials. Grassroots groups are supporting reforms such as ranked choice voting have already organized. Questions and concerns should be widely aired through intentional listening sessions and voter education efforts aimed at every citizen if MC 1322 passes the General Assembly. Maryland and Montgomery County, as you know, are badly lagging in gender parity in elected office at all levels. Maryland ranks 40th among states in the Gender Parity Index created and compiled by Represent Women, national group advancing reform so more women can run, win, serve, and lead. We all know that there were no women that were elected to at-large council positions in 2018, and only 1 woman currently serves on the county council. We've never had a female county executive. I think that you would all agree that it's a shameful record. We are a progressive county, and there's hope on the horizon if you are able to pass MC 1322. According to research conducted by Represent Women, localities with RCV show it may have a positive effect on electing women. At the start of 2020, women held just over 25% of all available seats in government, from national and state level office to major local level offices. In cities with RCV, however, half of all mayors and nearly half of all city council members are women. These data are consistent with the patterns shown in early RCV research. More women run and more women win, especially women of color. We need more voices of women, especially women of color, in decision-making roles as our elected officials. WDC, in concert with RCV Maryland, will work for passage of MC 1322 in the 2022 legislative session. Thanks so much for your consideration of this matter, and I hope you have a great night.
Thank you, Ms. Milano. Really appreciate it. Recognizing Mary Rooker from the Montgomery County Green Party in support for 3 minutes, please.
Yes, good evening. I am Mary Rooker, speaking for the Montgomery County Green Party. We urge a favorable report of MC 13-22, allowing the option of ranked choice voting, or RCV. We appreciate each of you for your past support of RCV. The Maryland Green Party has used RCV in its own internal party elections since our founding over 20 years ago. We worked to get ranked choice voting for the city of Tacoma Park in 2006, where voters approved it by 83%. We have supported RCV at the state level since 2007 and the Montgomery County level since 2016. I personally served on the Montgomery County Council's own Right to Vote Task Force in 2014 and 15. RCV for single and multi-member contests was one of our 59 recommendations to the council to improve voting, our electoral system. Third-party voters don't spoil elections. Poor voting methods do. Our non-majority voting system, a relic of British colonialism from 1789, is the real culprit. It has been improved upon everywhere else with RCV and easier ballot access for third parties. It's past time we fixed it here. We long ago stopped using the Pony Express for written communications and even the mimeographs of my youth for making copies. We've updated everything many times over, everything except our electoral system, the very lifeblood of democracy, now 240 years old. RCV would reduce the bitter fight already looming in next year's Montgomery County Executive Democratic primary. Without RCV, the winning Democrat will likely not have the support of most voting Democrats. RCV benefits all voters, including the nearly 1/4 of all unaffiliated Montgomery County registered voters. Such voters, like third parties, are often ignored and underrepresented. RCV is supported by the Washington Post, the New York Times, and even the Economist magazine, hardly radical overthrowers of society. Third parties were the first advocates of much of what makes us proud to be Americans today: the abolition of slavery, women's right to vote, the direct election of US senators, Social Security, and more. Imagine if the Green New Deal was introduced over 12 years ago when the Green Party first advocated a stronger version. Most of the developed world now enjoys multi-party systems that don't punish voters for having a range of views. If you would like to love your voting system as much as Tacoma Park voters do, please push even harder for RCV this year. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rooker. Really appreciate it. Recognizing Mary Lanigan from the League of Women Voters, Montgomery County, and support for 3 minutes, please.
Yes, hi, my name is Mary Lanigan. I'm with the League of Women Voters of Montgomery County. We support MC 1322, which authorizes the County Council to adopt by law a ranked choice voting method or an approval voting method for elections for local offices in Montgomery County. The proposed legislation permits the county to take the next step to determine and implement a voting method that includes a requirement to provide for an educational campaign explaining how to vote using ranked choice voting or approval voting. The League has long supported ranked choice voting, has testified each year this legislation has been introduced in the General Assembly, and is pleased there are multiple sponsors of the bill this year. The League was founded on the belief that voters should play a critical role in democracy. Ranked choice voting maximizes that ability by ensuring that winning candidates have support from a majority of voters rather than from a small plurality, as can occur when there are many candidates competing for the same position. RCV empowers voters because it allows them to vote for their true first choice candidate without feeling like they might be wasting their vote. RCV empowers elected officials because they will have a stronger mandate and more accountability when they know they are supported by a majority, at least 50% of the voters. RCV encourages more civilized, less negative campaigns because candidates will need to appeal to their opponent's supporters for their second choice votes. RCV was successfully used by voters in municipal elections in New York City and Salt Lake City in the last year, and it's been used successfully in Tacoma Park. Time has come to institute ranked choice voting in Montgomery County as a better method to determine the will of the voters. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lanigan. Really appreciate your testimony. Recognizing Shruti Bhatnagar of the Sierra Club Montgomery County for up to 3 minutes of testimony.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Shetty and members of the delegation. My name is Shruti Bhatnagar and I'm chair of the Sierra Club Montgomery County Group. Thank you for this opportunity to testify today. The Sierra Club Montgomery County Group supports Bill MC 1322 that would authorize the Montgomery County Council to adopt by law a ranked choice voting method or an approval voting method for elections to certain local offices. I might reiterate today some of the points that you already heard. The Sierra Club and its members care about both the natural and human environments and believe strongly in ending racial and social injustice. We believe the single round winner take all voting method would not advance these principles. Single round winner take all voting allows a candidate to win a multi-candidate race with a plurality even if they fall short of a majority. We support alternative electoral methods that better reflect the diversity of public opinion and allow voters to feel more empowered. Both ranked choice voting and approval voting methods reduce the chance that a person who is not supported by a majority of the votes in a multi-candidate election can be elected. Research shows that ranked choice voting, when compared to a single round plurality method, can result in a more diverse group of people running for elected offices, most notably women and particularly women of color. Research also supports that the claim that campaigning tends to be more civil and less negative when ranked choice voting is in use. Moreover, ranked choice voting is compatible with current voting equipment, so would not entail adding funding on jurisdictions. Finally, because MC 1322 is enabling legislation, it does not mandate the use of a method, but it would give Montgomery County the ability to take the steps to determine what method to use and when to implement it. Thanks to Delegates Palkovich-Carr, Al Carr, Delegate Charkoudian, Delegate Lopez, Moon, Lilichi, Delegate Solomon, Delegate Stewart, and Delegate Wilkins for co-sponsoring the bill MC 1322. We urge the full delegation to support this bill. Thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you, Ms. Fatnaker. Recognizing Diana Conway, individual in support for up to 2 minutes of testimony, please.
Great, thank you. Good evening, delegates and senators, and thank you to the senators who are joining us tonight. I know you're not technically on duty, so we appreciate your double duty. So thank you, Chair Shetty, and to the sponsor, Delegate Polakovich-Carr. I'm Diana Conway. I'm here in my capacity as an individual to ask for your advocacy when you get to Annapolis for MC 1322. Since we've done so well handling COVID in this county, I'll ask you to think of RCV as a vaccine or booster shot. It injects a standard of civility into your body politic and protects against the erosion of civility, because candidates are be jockeying, if not to be your first choice, then hopefully your second choice. And vilifying the first choice doesn't help the second choice person. Our current system is based on a flawed model that posits two undesirable assumptions. First is that if your top pick A, candidate A, doesn't win, you just check out and have no opinion among the remaining field. Second, and more insidious, this model also says that even if you do have an opinion, we don't want to hear it. Clearly a bad model. We need a better one. I think RCV enables the full expression of voters' opinions on all the candidates. As you heard, it brings in more women and people of color. It can allow us to show our neighboring jurisdictions that it can work, just as we've seen with finance reform and with COVID. So I also want to point out what Mary Rooker said, looking forward to the next CE election and trying to make sure our next county executive is actually the popular choice. Think about the Al Gore George Bush race. If we had had ranked choice voting, whose votes would Ralph Nader have gone to? Think how different our climate would look. Think how different everything would look. So I urge you to support this, and I'll give you back the other 20 seconds. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Conway. Good to see you again this evening. Recognizing Ron Abbasum Malik, an individual in support for up to 2 minutes of testimony, and he's our last person listed in support, and then we have one person for informational that we'll include next.
Thank you very much. My name is Ron Abbasum Malik, and I live in Bethesda. Democrats in Maryland currently have a majority in the state legislature and just an absolute majority in the Montgomery County Council. But the current county council actually has pretty major disagreements on a number of issues, despite everyone being a Democrat. If you don't follow county council meetings very closely, you would really have no idea. Over the past few years, a number of solutions have been discussed nationally on how to create a healthier and more representative democracy, and ranked choice voting, approval voting are among them. I absolutely support the passage of this ranked choice voting bill. I believe Maryland needs to become a multi-party democracy in order to thrive, and this bill is an important step in the right direction. In addition to this bill, though, I urge all the Democrats on this call to begin to start thinking about forming smaller sub-Democrat parties that have unique identities that break along existing coalition lines. You know, I'm someone, I don't have time to keep up with every amendment in every piece of state and county legislation, and it's really difficult to know what these coalitions are unless you're like a Maryland political insider. And the only way for someone like me to actually have an idea on what the kind of local, state and local coalitions are is by forming unique identities and unique sub-parties that, you know, I can latch onto and get information through that. Otherwise, I have to sit there and just watch meetings and council meetings and state legislative sessions, and just the average citizen doesn't have time to do something like that. So multi-party democracy is not going to happen simply by passing this bill. It really requires all the elected officials, especially on this call, to buy into that vision and do the work of actually forming multiple parties. And in addition to election reform, I'm sure it will also require, you know, legislative reform in the process of passing bills and accommodating coalition governments. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me today, and I support the passage of this bill.
Thank you so much for your testimony this evening. Our last testimony for this bill is from Chris Hughes on behalf of the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center, providing informational testimony for up to 3 minutes because it's an organization. But we encourage you to consider less if you would like.
I've tried to cut out as much as I can. So hopefully I keep it under 2.5. Thank you, Chair Shetty, and good evening, delegates and senators. And thank you for the opportunity to testify on MC 1322. My name is Chris Hughes, and I'm the policy director for the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. We are a 501c3 nonpartisan nonprofit based in DC that supports ranked choice voting implementations across the country by providing best practices, software tools, educational material, and other resources for ranked choice voting implementation to anyone interested in the voting method. I've been studying and advising on ranked choice voting implementation for 6 years, and my colleagues bring decades of election administration experience to the table. Ranked choice voting implementation considerations include voter education, ballot design, voting systems, results reporting, and post-election recounts and audits. These are all implementation questions that other ranked choice voting jurisdictions have grappled with and could provide best practices to Maryland for, and for which we have documents and other materials that we can provide to administrators in the state of Maryland. I'm going to briefly discuss ranked choice voting systems in Montgomery County now, and we'll keep it brief as promised. So 33 cities across 6 states used ranked choice voting this fall, and 24 of those cities used ranked choice voting for the first time this year. New York City, one of the largest and most complex election jurisdictions in the country, held their first ever ranked choice voting elections across 60 contests this year. They used the exact same voting systems and election equipment currently used in Maryland elections and were able to implement ranked choice voting on a massive scale. Having ranked choice voting capable systems, as Maryland already does, is a major step towards implementing ranked choice voting. The Resource Center had the opportunity to support election administrators in many of these RCV cities this fall, including in New York City. And one way we support these implementations is by providing RC Tab, which is also known as the Universal RCV Tabulator, and that's free open source counting software for ranked choice voting elections. RC Tab is a simple addition to any voting systems already used in a jurisdiction and was used in New York City as well as in 12 cities in Utah and Michigan to produce election results this fall. Before its implementation in those elections, the software was tested and approved in the states of New York, Michigan, and Utah, and of course would need to be approved before use in Maryland as well. It's available for free to any interested jurisdiction, including, of course, in Maryland. As I mentioned at the beginning of this, the Resource Center is available to provide implementation support throughout any ranked choice voting implementation in Maryland. We can provide materials, additional support, best practices, and can connect election administrators in Maryland with ranked choice voting administrators from across the country to provide those best practices, materials, and support. Thank you, and I look forward to answering any questions you have about ranked choice voting.
Thank you so much for your testimony, and you came in under 3 minutes. Good job. Do any members of the delegation have any questions of any of those who provided testimony and support or informational testimony? Great. So I will note, as I've done on prior bills, that the Montgomery County government, Montgomery County Council Vice President Evan Glass, Morgan Drayton on behalf of Common Cause Maryland, and Christy Demonowitz on behalf of Represent Maryland have all provided written testimony in support. It is part of your bill file. That concludes the bill hearing on MC 1322, as well as all of the bills in the Education, Elections, and Housing Committee. And I will turn the floor back to Chair Corman. Thank you all.
Thank you, Chair Shetty, for navigating us through that. As a reminder, those will all go to work sessions in Delegate Shetty's committee. So keep an eye out for the announcements about when that will take place. As we transition to our next committee, I want to shout out Delegate Queen. It's her birthday, and this is how she's spending it. So we really appreciate her being with us. And I know she was on a meeting early this morning as well with many members of the delegation. So happy birthday, Pam. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the Metro Washington Committee. The first few bills are actually Chair Carr's, so Vice Chair Charkoudian will take the helm.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, our next bill is PGMC 100-22, Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, Montgomery County, County Council and District Council voting threshold. Delegate Carr, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm, for the record, Delegate Al Carr here to present PGMC 100-22. The voters of Montgomery County approved a change to the county council to go from 9 members to 11 members, adding 2 additional district seats. There are a number of references in the state code to the number of votes it takes to do different things on the county council or the district code. And so Chair Corman had tasked me with updating the state code, all those references just to simply reflect an 11-member council. So the bill is not substantive, it's just reflecting the different number of votes you would need under an 11-member council, and I would ask for your favorable report. The bill doesn't take effect until the next term would start when we actually have 11 county council members.
Okay, are there any questions for the sponsor of the bill? Hearing none, I note that we only have written testimony on this, Montgomery County government in support. And so that concludes the testimony on PGMC 100-22. We'll move on to PGMC 101-22, Montgomery County Planning Board, open meetings, video and audio streaming and minutes. So we'll begin with bill sponsor. Delegate Carr, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Delegate Al Carr here on PGMC 101-22. This is a bi-county bill which will require the Montgomery County Planning Board to stream their open meetings and also provide written minutes. It codifies their current practice and establishes some parameters. It's patterned after House Bill 789, Delegate Charkoudian's wonderful bill from last year that we approved unanimously and passed the House in 2021, which requires WSSC to stream its open meetings, and I ask for your favorable report.
Are there any questions for the bill sponsor? Okay, hearing none. We have written testimony only on this bill, 1 in support from the county executive and pending from the county council and Maryland National Capital Parks Planning Commission. That ends the testimony on PGMC 101-22. Moving on to PGMC 103-22 by county commissions, ethics certification of compliance. Delegate Carr, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Al Carr here for PGMC 103-22. This is a bill that's designed to strengthen the ethics regulations and practices of our 3 bi-county agencies, WSSC, Park and Planning, and Washington Suburban Transit Commission. And it is designed to make them more consistent with existing law. Under the bill, each bi-county agency will be required to annually certify to the State Ethics Commission that their ethics regulations are similar or substantially similar to state ethics regulations as already required under law. One example of why the bill is needed, WSSC has very robust lobbying regulations that closely mirror the state's lobbying regulations, but Park and Planning did not. So, and example number 2 is the opposite. Park and Planning uses the identical state form for financial disclosures as we do, but WSSC's financial disclosure form for their employees was missing a section until recently. The language from the bill, it mirrors provisions of state law that apply to counties and municipalities, so it's nothing new. But I ask for your favorable report.
Great. Questions for the bill sponsor, Delegate Kaiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate Carr, I just have a question. I'm not sure if I heard you right. Did you say that the 3 agencies would have to provide this information every year?
Yes, under the bill, they would annually certify to the State Ethics Commission that they're in compliance.
A follow-up, Madam Chair. So if we make no changes on the state level and they've made no changes, they still have to go through it, or they just have to say, we still fit with state law?
Yeah, I mean, there's an annual report that they issue anyway, and they could, in that report, they could just say, we're still in compliance.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the bill sponsor? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to testimony from Amanda Farber. Ms. Farber, you have 2 minutes. Is Amanda Farber here? I thought I saw her. Well, there you go.
Hi, is that working now?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. My name is Amanda Farber. I'm a resident of Montgomery County, and I am testifying in support of PGMC 10322, which would require bi-county agencies to annually certify their ethics and lobbying regulations to the State Ethics Commission. I would like to thank Delegate Carr for introducing this needed legislation. So why is this legislation important? Because certain bi-county agencies have a considerable amount of decision-making power. Those agencies have the potential to be influenced during their decision-making process. And those agencies are supposed to have regulations that are similar or substantially similar to state ethics regulations. So this bill would help ensure that ethics and lobbying laws are being taken seriously by those agencies, and would allow the public to have greater trust in how these bi-county agencies are operating. Last month, one of the bi-county agencies, MMCPPC, released a report regarding the need to significantly revise and strengthen their lobbying policies and regulations. But that review and acknowledgement only occurred after that agency had received a request for compliance review from a concerned citizen who was paying attention to what was or what wasn't happening. So it's clear additional external accountability is needed. This legislation is a step in the right direction towards that end. It would be relatively easily implemented, should be welcomed by the agencies themselves, and I hope is supported by the legislature this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That is our only oral testimony. Is there any questions for the one-person panel? Hearing none, I'll note that there is written testimony in your file from the county executive in support and pending from the county council and Parks and Planning Commission. That concludes the testimony on PGMC 103-22. We're moving on to Chair Carr. I'm continuing. Yes, this is your bill.
So I will. Next bill is WSSC's bill. So I will.
You're good.
Take it from
Okay,
here.
I'm passing it back to you.
All right. Thank you very much. The next bill is PGMC 105-22 WSSC Minority Business Enterprise Utilization Program Termination Extension, requested by the chair on behalf of WSSC. And to present the bill, we have Guy Indies from WSSC.
Good afternoon or good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the delegation. Guy Indies, Government Affairs Manager for WSSC, here to present PGMC 105-22. The proposed legislation will extend the statutory authority for WSSC's Minority Business Enterprise Program for the period of 1 year ending on June 30th, 2023. The current authority to conduct this program sunsets on July 1st, 2022. Due to the COVID pandemic, we've ran into a few, our contractor performing the disparity study ran into a few obstacles trying to obtain information to complete the disparity study that is needed to justify the continuation of the program. We're asking for a 1 year extension instead of the usual 5 year extension that we would had the disparity study been completed. According to the contractor, the disparity study will be completed in the spring of 2022, and we anticipate if the disparity study justifies the program's continuation, we'll be back in 2023 for a 5 year extension. We ask for your favorable support.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Andes? Seeing none, I will note that Montgomery County.
Resnick
There is
has
one.
questions.
Sorry, Delegate Resnick.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Couple questions, Guy. How long has your program been in place?
That's a great question. I don't know the exact date. I know it's been in place for 15 plus years that I know of. I can get the exact day for you.
And what's the program's threshold requirements for minority-owned contracting? What's the threshold? What's the percentage?
I'm not. Oh, I can get you that information as well. I apologize for not having that on time, but I can get you all that information.
If you can add to that information, could you let me know how often you all have hit that percentage?
So I'm sorry, I don't understand the threshold question. So you're asking what our goals are?
When you have a minority set aside program in state government procurement, it usually is something like, X percentage of all contracting work or X percentage of all subcontracting work must go to a minority-owned, woman-owned, disadvantage-owned firm. And so I'm curious what that program is for you. I just want to compare to see how it differs from the state program and whether or not WSSC has ever hit those percentages that you have aspired to in statute.
Okay. I have those questions. I will have a response. I'll direct those questions to our minority or OSDI director and have a response drafted for you.
Thank you. Sorry, everyone. Procurement question. My antennas went up. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Seeing none, Montgomery County government submitted written testimony in support, and that concludes the hearing on 10522. The next bill is PGMC 10622, WSSC hiring and promotion preferences, veterans and their spouses. We have two witnesses in support, and presenting the bill will be Guy Andes from WSSC.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Guy Andes on behalf of WSSC Water here to present PGMC 10922. The proposed legislation will repeal the current WSSC statute pertaining to the competitive selection for appointments of veterans and adoptive processes utilized by the state. Currently, under current law, in order for a veteran to receive preference in the competitive selection process, the veteran must have been honorably discharged and been a resident of the state of Maryland at the time they entered the armed services. This issue was brought to our attention by a resident of, I believe, Montgomery County. I could be wrong on that, but a resident inside the sanitary district who brought this to our attention, and they requested that we change the statute. So therefore, we would like to adopt this, the statute utilized by the state, which allows a veteran of the armed forces who is honorably discharged or satisfactory completion of military service, and includes the National Guard, military reserves, Commission of Corps of Public Health Service, and the Corps of National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to qualify. It'll also allow for in addition to the eligible veteran, a spouse of an eligible veteran who has a service-connected disability, or the surviving spouse of a deceased eligible veteran to also be eligible for this preference. We urge your support of this bill, and I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, well, we have our next witness in support, Mr. David Peterson from the Military Officers Association of America, Montgomery County chapter. You have up to 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm Dave Peterson. I'm the president of the Montgomery County chapter of the Military Officers Association. And I'm also here representing the Maryland Military Coalition, which is a collection of 17 organizations whose purpose is to advocate in a nonpartisan way for the interests of veterans in the state of Maryland. One of our coalition goals is to advocate for legislation that advances veterans workforce development. Since Montgomery County and Prince George's County have likely have the largest veterans populations of all the counties in the state. This bill was something that came to our attention. The reasons for WSSC's request for the legislation was clearly explained to us when we asked why the other legislation, section 3714 of the Labor and Employment article, wasn't appropriate. With the explanation that we received, we will now affirmatively like to ask the county delegation to support this bill and advance it to the General Assembly session for further consideration. My chapter and the coalition in general support any reasonable circumstance whereby a Maryland citizen who has honorably served in one of the nation's uniformed services can receive a preference in hiring and/or promotion in the private sector workforce. The inclusion of spouses in this ability also recognizes the fact that spouses also serve. Eventual enactment of this legislation will provide WSSC as an employer with exactly the same authorities available to other employers in Maryland and to the benefit of Maryland veterans. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peterson. Are there any questions for either of these witnesses? We have a question from Delegate Cullison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Guy, am I understanding that what you're proposing is exactly the same standards and protocols that the state is now using?
Yes, ma'am. That is correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions? All right. Seeing none, I will note that Montgomery County Council wrote in support, and Montgomery County Executive's position is pending. And that concludes the hearing on 106-22. Next, we will turn to PGMC 109-22, WSSC Plumbing and Fuel Gas Services licenses and penalties requested by the chair on behalf of WSSC. And we have Guy Andes who will present the bill.
One last time, Guy Andes on behalf of WSSC Water here to present PGMC 109-22. This proposed legislation will grant WSSC the authority to impose a penalty not exceeding $5,000 for each violation to persons who violate provisions of WSSC fuel and gas, WSSC plumbing and fuel gas codes. You have our written testimony before you. Simply put, this bill will allow, as a bi-county agency, will grant us the same authority as the state plumbing board has to assess this penalty for violations of the state plumbing board. Currently, right now, if you violate the plumbing code, plumbing and gas fitting code, you're subject to a progressive fine structure, which begins at $250 for the first offense, 500 seconds, $750, and then 1,000 for the fourth and subsequent offense. We believe that this is not a large enough deterrent to individuals who continually violate the plumbing and gas code, gas fitting code, and we ask that you support our request to impose the higher penalties such as those imposed by the state board. I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Andes. Do we have any questions? I have a question, and all right, WSSC has been around for 100 years, and the mission has changed over the years. WSSC used to do some things that it doesn't do anymore. Like WSSC used to do stormwater, and that function went to the counties and local governments. And WSSC once upon a time did trash pickup. That went to local governments as well. But WSSC still does water and sewer, of course. And then it regulates, plumbing and, and gas, which means, chimneys and furnaces and boilers and clothes dryers and things like that. Can you explain to me, why does it make sense for WSSC to regulate those things as opposed to, just rolling that into the state and to be like the rest of the state?
So I appreciate the question, Delegate Carr, and I appreciate you giving me the heads up on this. And I did get somewhat of an answer for you today. I hope it answers your question. As you mentioned, WSSC has been around since 1918. We are getting ready to enter our 104th year of existence. We are a very unique bi-county agency. We provide the water and wastewater to Prince George's and Montgomery counties. As you said, Baltimore County is also similar in nature. Is we are the only jurisdictions that have our own codes. Regulate inside those districts. The licensure of the plumbers that operate within those districts. Everyone else in the other jurisdictions have to apply for a state plumbing license. That being said, you asked the question, why not roll into the state? Well, the state simply is an administrator of the licenses and general enforcement. The counties go out there and enforce the state plumbing code and then refer them to the state board for enforcement. We provide over 16, we license almost 1,600 plumbers throughout the sanitary district. We perform annually roughly, last year we did 66,000 and over 66,000 inspections. It's essential that we maintain the regulatory authority because of the uniqueness of us providing the water to both Prince George's and Montgomery counties. Water that's taken from the Potomac doesn't just stay in Montgomery County. It does flow down to Prince George's County, and some water that we take from the Patuxent does flow up, believe it or not, to Montgomery residents. We are charged since the General Assembly did authorize the establishment of the Sanitary Commission. We have been charged with regulating plumbing and gas fitting within the sanitary district. We do things such as metering and billing, pre-treatment for industrial users, fats, oils, and grease abatement that meet our consent decree. That's something that gives us having the WSSC plumbing and gas code allows us the flexibility to meet that consent decree without having to go to the state to do that. And it's important that we have the regulatory authority, especially in the cross connection or the backflow regulatory aspect of things. So a backflow is put in place to allow water to go through and not come back into the system. So if it goes into the house or a building, it stays in the building until it comes out of a fixture or gets flushed down the toilet, and then it goes into the sewer. If it comes back into the system, it could contaminate the system where residents and our customers and business owners could be subject to disease such as Legionnaire's disease and things of that nature. So that's just one aspect of it. If you look across the state just adopted the national standard plumbing code, or prior to the 2020, the state adopted the national standard plumbing code and the national fuel gas code of NFPA 54. We adopted the international building code. Please don't ask me the nuances of the two. I do not know the difference of that, but there are several nuances that are different, and that's why another reason why we believe we should maintain the regulatory authority for the sanitary district. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? All right, seeing none, that concludes the hearing on 10922, and I'll turn it back over to Delegation Chair Corman.
Thank you, Chair Carr. Thank you, Vice Chair Charkoudian. As a reminder, these bills will go to work sessions. We are back on Wednesday for night 2 of our bill hearings. Happy birthday again to Delegate Queen. Welcome again to Delegate Foley. Hope you enjoyed that, especially that first bill. And let me see if thank you again to Rebecca and Selena for your work. And let me throw it over to Chair Kramer to close us out.
Thank you for that, Chair Corman. Very efficiently run by all of the subcommittee chairs, so thank you for that. And look forward to seeing you again this Wednesday evening for the next round of local and bi-county bill hearings. Everybody stay healthy and well. Thank you.